Hello everyone, Zeno What If here. Those that are new to the channel, subscribe to see some of the content I made. Leave a comment down below for any ideas. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. Link down in the description of the fanfiction of this, What If. To bring in part 14 of What If the Gate appeared in G.I. Joe. Chapter 26, Welcome to Alnistown. That idiot prince is in one of his moods again, Tyrell thought grimly. Though named heir to the imperial throne, Zorzel had been systematically excluded from the governance of the empire. According to Boro, even Princess Pina had been given some assignment in regards to the current war. Even if it was mere, busy work, it was more than Emperor Molt had been willing to entrust to his heir. Objectively, of course, Tyrell could understand this. She would not trust the prince to even supervise a chariot race at the Maximus by himself, let alone anything of importance. In practice, however, this was highly inconvenient to her plans. She was well aware that Boro was merely using her. He was oily enough but he lacked the means to manipulate Zorzel. So for the moment, he needed Tyrell, who had learned just how to stroke Zorzel's massive ego while providing him with the sense of power and conquest that he craved. And for now, Tyrell needed Boro and his network of agents. So she pretended to believe that Boro did not have a completely different goal than she did. He could claim to her all he wanted, that as an outcast of imperial society, he wanted to see it all destroyed, but that was a lie. There was a difference between the two of them. Tyrell had been a true ruler. She had loved her people, fought for them, with them. She had delivered herself into the hands of their enemies in an attempt to save her people. She had suffered for her sins. She had been broken to rock bottom and knew the bitter taste of defeat. Not just defeat but total, soul-crushing defeat. The knowledge that sometimes all was in fact lost. Boro, on the other hand, was even as an outcast, still an imperial at heart. He truly believed the propaganda that the empire had never been defeated and would always be victorious in the end. Of course, he needed to believe it, for his own plans meant nothing if there was no empire for him to rule. The two of them had secretly discussed this more than once in the past months, that the armies of the empire had been brutally smashed by whatever enemy they had provoked from across the gate. Of course, the empire admitted no such defeats in public, but it was still spoken in quiet whispers among the powerful. Further, the imperial throne had released no list of glories. There were no triumphs for victorious generals. Instead, the public was merely told that the empire needed more men to prosecute the war and drive the last remnants of the barbarians from the sacred soil of Alnis and humble the barbarians. No mention had been made to the public of the 100,000 men who were supposed to be conquering these barbarians already, or the next 100,000 who had been slain attempting to prevent these barbarians from establishing a foothold in the most sacred heart of imperial territory. Nor was it mentioned how Molt had sent the armies of the empire's allies to slaughter. Based on this, the average imperial citizen could be excused for believing the war was progressing satisfactorily. Boro and Tyrell had discussed the rumors and reports from his operatives, and they agreed that all evidence indicated that the empire had bitten off much more than it could chew. The difference was that Tyrell could see in his eyes that Boro really did not believe it. She understood what he did not. Once an army was broken in the field, it could not simply be replaced like a torn tunic. Warriors took time to train and they needed equipping. This equipment needed to be crafted and it all costed money. Unless the enemy was much more badly damaged than she thought, there was no real fighting force capable of stopping this enemy. No, Boro simply could not accept this, despite the evidence before him. Boro wanted to undermine the current rulers of the empire but not the empire itself. He intended to take advantage of the current situation, but in the end, he needed the empire to prevail. Tyrell wanted to see the whole hated thing burn. For now, the two were allies, using each other for their own ends. She was sure that Boro would betray her when it suited him, just as she planned to toss his broken corpse atop the empire's blazing pyre. But plans for the future were a luxury to be entertained outside of the wrath of Zorzel. And shunted aside by his father and left to his own devices, the prince stalked his personal palace like a spoiled, petulant child looking for ways to ease his boredom. His current tantrum seemed to be something in the kitchens. At least that wasn't too likely to bring her much extra grief. She would listen solicitously as he complained, decry the incompetence of whomever he was upset with and suggest that they needed to be taught a lesson. If he declined, she would praise his magnanimity, and if he punished the offenders, then he would derive enjoyment from it, be pleased that she agreed with him and divert his wrath away from her. And not incidentally, from the other slaves as well. If she had a people any longer, they were her fellow slaves. They accepted her as the leader among them, followed her instructions, and she protected them as best she could. Sometimes with her own body. This was especially true of Noriko. As she had told Zorzel, so carefully on more than one occasion, that Noriko was far too delicate a flower for his normal methods. He was used to instant obedience, and any failure to promptly comply with his demands was usually met with violence, and for a period of almost a week, Zorzel had set about teaching this to his newest toy. Tayul had taken a risk of incurring Zorzel's wrath by interfering, but his wrath was nothing he had not already inflicted upon her. Of course, she did not intend to risk angering him enough so as to endanger her own life. Death would be so inconvenient to her plans after all. But she promised the prince that she would teach the girl how to please him better, and in return, Noriko had been moved to Tayul's room, where Tayul had taught her carefully to obey and endure. She treated the girl's wounds, threatening guards and the healers with Zorzel's displeasure if Noriko was not well tended. And soon, she had the girl's trust. Her delicate flower talked to her about the world beyond the gate and its marvels, and Tayul quickly understood that the Empire could not hope to match that kind of power. And recently, Tayul had told her that her people had an army in Falmart. Do not speak or think of this in the prince's presence, but know they are coming. One day they will come here and you will tell them how I have cared for you. She smiled. That is all I ask. But right now, as she watched Noriko sleeping, curled up on her cot, Tayul only wondered one thing: where are the Japanese? Pina didn't forget the promise she made to the United Nations: once I return to my nation, I will do everything in my power to locate everyone who was taken from Ginza and return them to their families. She also understood the risk of such decision, but she knew that she has no other choice. The Empire had made a grave mistake. This was a fact that haunted the Imperial Princess ever since she met Centurion Prime, who showed her the evidence of Empire's attack on Ginza. Those images were still haunting Pina. Her father's attempt to expand the borders had brought an enemy the Empire had no hopes of defeating, an enemy that was angry at her nation's aggression and calling for justice for all those who had been killed or taken. The only thing that preventing the ANF from marching on Sedera itself and burning it to the ground was their hope, that there's some hope in common sense in citizens of the Empire. It's either that or full open war between the Empire and ANF, a war that will be ended quickly in Sedera's ultimate destruction. She needed to find those who had been taken by the Empire from beyond the gate, but it was a task easier said than done. Despite her title, Pina never really associated herself with any nobles, who were known to be major players in the slave trading business. Mainly because, unlike her older brothers, Pina was the child of one of her father's many concubines. In the minds of many, she was just one of Molt's many, illegitimate, children born out of wedlock. But there was one person Pina knew would have the connections she needed to complete her task and keep her promise. Pina just hoped that she did not regret it by bringing her own brother Diabo into her plans, but her was very vital to the success of her plans. As the second son of the emperor, Diabo spent several years of his life in Senate, working with nobles and senators, who just happened to be main contractors of the same slave trading guild. Diabo could easily find out where the majority of slaves from the other side would go, and pinpoint the exact nobles who owned them. That way, Pina could easily learn more about the captives from Ginza and smuggle this information to ANF Command, which was exactly what she's been doing now. Princess, Beefeater Katie spoke, as she approached her longtime friend and leader. The knights are all ready to leave. Thank you, Beefeater, replied Pina, as she got up from her desk and walked toward her fellow knight. I wish I could join you, but I have to stay here and meet the nobles that will be visiting in the coming days. Pina, are you certain this is the best course of action? The Rose Knight captain asked, a hint of concern in her voice as she spoke. If your father finds out. It's not my father I'm worried about. The Imperial Princess cut her off, but the wrath of the other worlders. They've came to free their own people, who's been captured and enslaved, and for this, they're ready to destroy Sedera. We need to somehow appease them by giving the information about their possible captives, no matter how legal or illegal this is. Right now, Father has the problems of his own. He's too busy trying to convince the Senate not to give home the vote of no confidence, which could cost him his own crown or even a head. With such pressure on him, he's got no time to know about our work here. Still, if word gets out that we are helping the other worlders. I am well aware of what can happen, replied Pina, but compared to what will happen if the other worlders are not able to retrieve their people, is just a child's play. The Empire has already lost this war, and it's just a matter of time, before even Father accept it. Right now, the best we can do is appease the other worlders and hope that we are able to convince them to show mercy on us. You really believe that the Empire has lost this war? The noble asked curiously. Genuinely unsettled by her princess's statements, as Pina was quite possibly the biggest supporter the Empire had. We already did, Beefeater. I knew it, when I was at Alnus and in Other World. Their power is practically immeasurable. With the manpower and resources those big three countries have, all our chances to prolong the inevitable are even lower than zero. Anybody who would be stupid enough to provoke them to march on Sidera will only bring the destruction of the Empire much sooner than it's expected. Pina then handed the knight several scrolls. Sir Grey and Alexander with Hamilton will remain here with me to meet with the noble house leaders. When they arrive, and Lady Panache is already at the Italica, Countess Mayui and Emroy's herald to assist in training the city militia. You will be heading to Alnus to meet with Centurion Prime and other ANF commanders and hand them these. What are they? They're lists of slave pens and the imperial families that control them, explained Pina. Those slaves are one of the reasons the other worlders wage this war. They want their people back, and I intend to help them. How were we able to get these? The noble knight asked her leader, a shocked expression now evident on her young face. How I got these are not important, answered Pina. What is important is the survival of the Satyran people. You must go now. I don't want anyone to see the knights leaving the Jade Palace and inform anyone who does not need to know what we are doing. Beefeater just stood there in silent shock. What Pina was asking her to do was straight up treason. The princess was actively assisting the other worlders on Alnus Hill, and if caught, not even her status would save her or the Rose Knights. But Pina had changed since her meeting with the other worlders, and even more so after returning from her trip beyond the gate. And Beefeater herself was well aware of just how powerful the other worlders were, as she could still remember seeing them defeating those bandits at Italica. If all that power would be turned against them, Beefeater understood perfectly that her chances in such fight are even lower than zero. She had no reason to doubt that Pina's actions were to ensure the survival of the Satyran people, and was doing everything she could to prevent angering this coalition. All Beefeater did was bowing before exiting the princess's room and heading off to lead the White Rose Knights out of the capital, leaving Pina to continue her actions that were potential to treason. But it's either that, or risk the destruction of the Empire, and Pina desperately wanted to avoid it as best as she could. Your Highness, said Hamilton, coming to Pina's office, I've brought the lists of the nobles we wanted to released from other worlders' captivity. Yes, Hamilton, replied Pina, taking the lists. I'll look at them. She looked at the lists and saw 15 names on them. Have you make sure that son of Lord Cicero Lamoltos is in them? She asked. Yes, Your Highness, answered Hamilton, as well the son of Marquise Duque. Yes, I will attend their dinner as well, said Pina. Their son's return is vital to making them to join our side in Senate. Is Ambassadors Russell and Sugawara ready? Yes, answered Hamilton, they'll be expecting us at the Jade Palace this morning. Let's go then, said Pina, getting up and walking to the door. Pina was really worried about her meeting with Lord Cicero. After all, he was one of the Hawks. No, he was their leader. His family was one of the founding families of the Empire, the ones who built the Empire as it was today. He was close to the Emperor. Some say that he could also become the next Emperor himself, and he also maintained a huge influence in Senate by having a strong voice of those who pushes for war. However, Pina knew that Cicero could be easily reasoned with. Currently, the Senate was been divided between hawks and doves, with Emperor couldn't get enough voices to continue his policy. Both parties were not in his favor, especially the doves, whose more and more openly spoke about Emperor's reckless policy to send his forces at the Alnus Hill and starting the war with the other worlders. The Hawks, of course, continued to push for war, but even they've become more and more tired of constant defeat. In fact, some of them are starting to spoke about removing Molt from his throne and exchange him with more stronger leader. Cicero was the perfect candidate to replace Molt, aside from Zorzel and Diabo, but Pina had an ace in the hole. His own son had participated in the invasion to Ginza and got captured. If she can persuade Cicero to join the Doves by telling him about his son, he could become a valuable asset. She need to push the balance in Senate in her favor, as well leaving the Hawks without a leader. It was a dire gamble, but Pina believed that she might have the chance to success, with the little help from Sugawara and Russell, that is. At the Alnus Hill, Fort Ginza was now mostly built as a large octagon surrounding the gate, spanning almost a 20-kilometer radius with a large number of tall buildings, barracks, townhouses, and even large warehouses filling the base. At the north side, almost up to the mountain range that stretched northwest and east of the base, stood a large launch pad being built, where the satellites were soon to be launched. As soon as the parts were made, shipped and more information on the environment of the special region's outer atmosphere got here, then they would finally have satellites. On the east side, the housing units, mess halls, barracks and other facilities were set up, some of the soldiers' families having moved to the special region since their fathers or mothers in the armies that are operating there under the ANF had been there for at least 8 months now, and were going to be stationed there for some time yet. Which called for several schools and other recreational facilities to be built. On the west side, the air base was fully set up, housing over 60 fighter jets, attack aircrafts and bombers, as well cargo planes from a number of nations, and over 150 helicopters from attack helicopters, transport helicopters, and utility helicopters. On the south side is where the garages and warehouses were, storing every type of armored vehicle, and transport vehicles from tanks to regular civilian cars for travel outside the base were kept. At the center of the base, overtop the gate, a large octagon-shaped building imitating the general shape of the overall base with a large dome in the center for the gate, was the ANF HQ. On 4 sides of the gate facing north, south, east and west, large tunnels were built into the building for vehicles to go in and out of the building and/or the gate. All officers had their offices moved here, and where the ANF's oversight committee also had a meeting room, but weren't allowed to set up an office there yet as parts of the building were still under construction. Outside, the packed refugee camp grew, until it became a full-grown town, now called Alnustown, with creatures of a large variety of species now lived there. Many different people, including the people from Kota, Colton and Copperkeep, were also now resided there. Many escaped slaves, or those who had fallen upon misfortune, also moved there to either escape condemnation on the ex-slaves' part, and others hoping to find some fortune. Bunny people, cat people, wolf people, some elves, harpies, angels, and many other creatures, including a few goblins and hobbits, who had left the slums of the Empire in hopes to raise their fledgling family here outside of any racism or bias like the Empire. While they didn't manage to totally escape the prejudice, they were allowed to have many things that they weren't allowed in the Empire, including owning a business. Many traders were now gathering here, mostly from rumors and tales of strange tools and items that couldn't be obtained anywhere else in their world. Mostly from shops set up, run and guarded by ANF soldiers called the PX. Tourists also became a common sight as the ANF held military drills, and their equipment moved frequently throughout Alnustown. Many wanted to get a sight of these strange carriages and weapons of war that defeated the Empire, and to take home these strange images on paper of them with the equipment and vehicles called pictures, to keep in remembrance of their visit. The ANF finally got a common combat uniform, and a common flag to represent them. Their combat outfits all had heavy chest plates along with shoulder plates and knee guards. A tactical vest was made to fit over top the chest plates so that it's not a ridiculous number of layers being put on. The color and pattern is a derivative to the Marpat color and pattern, but with more green like the Catbit coloring, since there was so much green vegetation in the special region. The ANF flag was consisted of an eagle in a triangle with wide opened wings. The ANF Peacekeeping Force, nicknamed Defenders, also have their banner. Their flag was a basic ocean blue flag with 3 large letters, ANF, in the center, surrounded by fig leaves in a small crown pattern kinda like the UN flag, but there was an inscription in Latin at the bottom. Unus Mundus, Unus Somnium. One world, one dream. It had been already a month since hostilities between the Empire and the ANF began and 3 weeks since Japan and her allies had crossed through the gate in retaliation. Despite what they had been told about the other worlders and their would-be intentions, the people who called the Alnis province home soon realized that the men and women of the allied nations' forces were not the demons the Empire had painted them as, especially the so-called demons of Alnis Hill. With the Imperial Army now non-existent in the region, the ANF had taken it upon themselves to secure the province from not only the Empire, but the bandit hordes that sought to take advantage of the situation. A task which was made easier after the Battle of Italica, where most of the bandit armies were eliminated by the ANF. Thus by destroying the Cobalt Pincers, and securing the Italica, Centurion had once again killed 2 birds with 1 stone. With Italica now an independent nation and the region now firmly in ANF hands, Alnis had become very peaceful, even more so than when the Empire was in charge. The numerous roads that ran across the land were now being patrolled heavily by ANF forces, thus allowing caravans of goods and people to move freely without fear of falling victim to bandit attacks. Trade began to flow freely between not only the villages, but with Italica itself and even the former vassal states of the Empire. Once again, Italica was becoming one of the more important trading posts within the former imperial province. But Italica was not the only major trading post in Alnis, as another town began to flourish in this new age. What originally began as a refugee camp for those fleeing the conflict, Alnistown had grown into a thriving settlement that existed in the shadow of Fort Ginza. As news about the new town began to spread, thousands began to flood into the settlement. Some saw it as a place where they could escape the laws and subjugation that came from being under the imperial regime. While for others, Alnis town was a chance to start over and live new lives. Not surprisingly, many demi-humans and escaped slaves began to arrive, and what began as nothing more than a refugee camp, became quite the small city. With assistance from ANF Engineer Corps, Alnistown had been developed with a lot of planning included. The streets, though not paved, were wide and allowed free movement of traffic. The buildings themselves were constructed using techniques not even the most seasoned of woodworkers, tradesmen and masons had even thought of doing. They were much sturdier than anything they had seen before, and the fact that said buildings were constructed much quicker than traditional housing, made the locals adopt these new techniques as their own. Proper drainage prevented water from settling and turning the dirt streets into muddy messes, while pipelines provided the town with a daily supply of clean drinking water. Now one would think that such a diverse mix of peoples and cultures would cause problems in this new village, and there were a few minor incidents between demi-humans and those who were not happy with the idea of having them live there. But in reality, Alnistown was quite peaceful, and many of the town's inhabitants did not really care just who lived among them. Just as long as they did not cause any trouble, that is. In the beginning, Japanese and American military police patrolled Alnistown and kept the peace. But with the United Nations now sending its support behind the Japanese lead operation, it was not long before other military organizations began to exit the gate under the banner of UN peacekeepers. One of the more notable units to come through the gate were over 400 members of the Italian armed forces, specifically the Carabinieri units. They were sent to assist the coalition police, not only Alnistown, but Italica as well. These people were quite efficient in helping with preserving law and order in both Alnistown and Italica, and Centurion had trusted them fully, because of his constant work with them in the past against the Italian mafia Cosa Nostra. It was not uncommon to see Carabinieri Fiat parked alongside Japanese high-mobility vehicles in Alnistown, while Russian National Guard soldiers made foot patrols around the recently established marketplace. Even more so, it was not uncommon for local children to interact and even play with some of the ANF soldiers peacekeepers that ventured into the settlement while off duty. As a matter of fact, there were a number of establishments that not only catered to the local population, but coalition soldiers as well. Fort Ginza itself was still abuzz with activity. Despite the apparent lull in the conflict, the ANF was still very much active in not just Alnis, but some of the surrounding areas as well. Patrols were still being sent out into the countryside to ensure that the province and Italica remained secured, while helicopters of various sizes and types continued to fly in and out of the fort in support of ground operations. Combat jets would occasionally fly out of Alnis airfield to conduct air patrols as well. After the incident with the flame dragon, the coalition did not want to take any chances that another similar creature would appear in the skies above Alnus. As a result, a no-fly zone now existed above not only Alnus, but Italica and even along the border with the United Independent Kingdoms of Falmart. But despite these facts, Alnistown thrived, and as far as the residents were concerned, the war was still very much far away. Children happily played in the streets as new shops catered to the growing population. A town market had recently opened in the town's center, while PX store was due to open within a few days. While in a recently opened tavern, the residents frequently interacted with coalition troops who often came in for a drink or even a hot meal. "You have to admit, this is pretty impressive," Williams stated, as he and Atami made their way through the town's main street on foot. The two men were on their way to check out the recently opened PX store, as well as visit some of the town's people they had befriended over the last few weeks. Many of whom had settled here back when the town was nothing more than a basic refugee camp. "You would never guess that this was nothing more than a tent city just a few weeks ago," Williams continued, as he saw some children run past him. "Yeah," Atami replied, just as a carabinieri drove past, "and it's still growing. People like to feel safe, after all," stated Williams, "and from what I have heard, Alnistown is the safest town in the province." "Well, that, and the PX store selling a bunch of product the people here have never seen before," Atami added, as the duo came up on the tavern. "Old School told me that only the PX store existed here at first, now the whole town seems to have been built up around it." "Yay, he told me that too," the Marine replied. "He also said that a lot of people are buying stuff here and are making a killing by selling it to the nobility in the empire." "So that's what's going on," Atami said with a smile. "Well, a little free trade is a good thing." "And that is what you call capitalism," added Min, as he and Eric joined the Japanese soldiers and Marine. "Yup," added Eric, "everybody loves money. I am just glad the UN decided to send in peacekeepers to help us maintain security in the town," Williams told his friends, as he saw some Italian soldiers walk past wearing the signature blue helmets that designated them as being a part of the United Nations Gate Task Force. "Kinda eases the strain on our guys and allow us to focus on the other towns in the region. But the trouble is, that we're now getting too much free times," said Min. "What do you mean, Lou?" asked Eric. "Take a look," answered Min, pointing at the group of soldiers and Marines drinking beer and laughing. "I'm no prohibitionist, but if these guys continue to do that, they'll start to have bad habits." "Yeah," said Eric, "and many of our boys had a good taste for bad habits." "Hey, a soldier needs to unwind after some hard days," said Atami, "and if things start to go out of hands, we have ways to straighten those goofballs out." Suddenly there was a scream coming from the tavern. "Hands off my tail, asshole. Kya." A moment later, a loud crash was heard and a man was sent flying out of the tavern just feet away from the four young men. "Grr, who the hell do you think you are?" yelled Delilah, one of the tavern workers. "This ass is for show, not for trash like you to grab and smack, you got it, pervert." "Watch your mouth, bitch," the man growled back, as he tried to get back on his feet. "You're messing with the wrong." "Wrong, what?" suddenly heard another voice. The man then turned to see Centurion standing right behind him. "SS Sir Prime," he gasped, with blood freezing in his veins from horror. "I was going through the town to check on the situation," said Centurion, "and I've just happened to stumble on some troublemaker, who's been getting personal with the waitresses of town's tavern." "Who gave you the right to violate one of our guests, you jerk?" "No," muttered the man, sweating himself like a pig, I didn't." "Well, I'm glad to hear that," said Rory, who just appeared with Mayud, and pointed her halberd to the man, "because you surely don't want to mess with the other worlder's commander, or me." Emroy's girl," muttered the man, now literally pissing himself in his pants by the mere sight of Rory. "Wow, you're really good at guessing," chuckled Rory, "but tell you what, if you wanna spare your life, we suggest that you should leave and never come back." "That's right," said Centurion, "we don't need no perverts and troublemakers in Alnistown. Leave. You're not welcome here." It was in that moment the would-be pervert realized that he rather enjoyed having all his limbs and head attached to his body. He then proceeded to practice the time-honored tradition of running for his own life, as he disappeared into one of the nearby side streets, but suddenly he was stopped by someone's barking commands in Italian. "Looks like Giorgio and his men should handle things here," said Centurion. "Out on patrol again, Rory?" Atami asked the demi-goddess, just as the same creep from before was being brought out by two Italian carabinieri in handcuffs. "There have been a lot more people coming in and out of town lately," stated the apostle, "many of them just idiots like that guy just now, who can't seem to keep their hands to themselves." "Tell me about it," snorted in discontent Centurion. "Well, you're doing great," replied the JSDF officer. "Well, were you guys heading into the tavern?" "Actually, we were heading to the PX store," replied Williams. "Well, that's good," said Centurion, "say hello to Maya for me." "What about you, sir?" asked Eric. "I've got something to discuss with Delilah," answered Centurion, "it's really important." "Rory, would you mind to join me?" "Sure, why not?" answered Rory. "Mayut, take care of things for me, I'll be back in a few minutes." "Yes, your holiness," bowed Mayut, as demi-goddess went with Centurion into tavern. "I swear, that girl scares me sometimes," stated Williams. "Alness," breathed Yao, looking down from the hill which the new residents called Sugarloaf. Finally, Nayu agreed. Walking down to the town's main gate, the two were soon able to relate their situation to the members of the civic guard who were manning the gate alongside PA troops. Facilitation of communication with all new arrivals was a primary concern here, and while Yao was not exceptionally fluent in Populary, Nayu spoke it well. Yao would learn soon enough, Nayu knew. Most elves had a knack for languages. Excellent hearing and memory were only part of the reason why this was so, but the important thing was that the two Vietnamese soldiers who had drawn gate duty this morning were able to quickly relay the situation up the chain of command to General Prime, who agreed to meet with the Dark Elf representatives later that afternoon in tavern. First, however, the two would need to go through the standard medical examinations before entry, then they would wait. "So, let me get this straight," said Centurion, while he and Rory seated at the tavern with two elves. "Your names are Yao Ha Dushi and Nayu Ha Nin of the Dushi Dark Elves tribe at Black Forest in Elb." "That's right," said Nayu, "and we've come to seek the help from the men in green, to help us defeat the beast that's been terrorizing our tribe." "Could you please be more specified about this beast?" said Centurion. "What exactly is this creature?" "It's called Aquadrico, the sea dragon," said Yao. "This massive creature does not fly nor breathe fire, but it moves at unnatural speeds and blasts powerful streams of water from its nightmarish mouth, so powerful, they could smash the sturdiest of stone structures as if they were a child's toys and washed away the entire villages in one blast. Many of our clan's best warriors tried to fight the creature off, but none ever returned and more villages were destroyed. It was not long before our clan's numbers began to dwindle and our survivors were forced to seek shelter in the many caves in the nearby mountains," said Nayu, "but it's only a matter of time before the Aquadrico would find them and finished off our clan once and for all." Out of desperation, our Dushi clan sent out several of their best surviving warriors to find help, said Yao. "Despite our reclusive lifestyle, we, the Dark Elves of the Black Forest, have occasionally encountered travelers who passed through our territory and who told us about the goings-on of the outside world. It was during one of these encounters that one traveler told our warriors about strangers that came from another world and who had killed a flame dragon after it attacked them. He said that these other worlders used strange but powerful weapons and were able to kill the beast swiftly. The traveler even showed us a scale he had taken from the dead creature, to prove that his story was true. Of course not everyone believed this story at first, but with the Aquadrico rampaging and with Black Forest clans now on the brink of extinction, were now desperate for any kind of salvation." "I see," frowned Centurion, rubbing his chin, then he turned to Rory. "Tell me, Rory, where was exactly Flame Dragon rested, before he was been awakened?" "At the Kingdom of Elb Mountains," answered Rory. "And what about this Aquadrico?" asked Centurion. "What is it doing in freshwater river, so far from sea? If I remember correctly, sea dragons does not come to dry land because of their nature." "Obviously, something has caused him to went into Elb," said Rory, "or someone." "You thinking, what I'm thinking?" "Yes. It's got to be her." Centurion then turned to the elves. "Miss Yao Ha Dushi, Miss Nayu Ha Nin," he said, "you've made the right decision to come to Alnus. However, we need to further discuss your problems with the rest of the Allied Nations Forces Command. Tell you what, why won't you step into Alnus tomorrow morning, then we shall discuss your problem with the rest of my commanders. We shall be there, Sir Prime, said Nio. Centurion then give the elves a small plastic card. This pass will allow you to enter our base, he said. You'll walk into the post and show this card to post commander, then you say to him, that you've been summoned by General Prime. He then take you to our headquarters, where we'll be waiting. Thank you, Sir Prime, bowed Yao. Then she and Nio leaves the tavern. What you make of this, Rory? Centurion asked his companion. Obviously, Giselle is working on another Hardy's scheme, answered Rory. It's quite possible that she has deliberately awakened the Deirdrico and brought from sea the Aquadrico, so that they would be mated with each other. And produced dragon eggs, said Centurion. So, that's what's going on. She's growing her own army of dragons. But what for? Don't you get it? Because of the failure of Flame Dragon, Hardy's now is in the tight position. The gods are really angry on her. She needs to destroy the gate and defeat the ANF, before the gods could punish her for such backstabbing. That sounds logical, said Rory. So, what now? You find Lele and tell her to be tomorrow at the HQ, we need an interpreter. Meanwhile, I'll tell Hazama and the others about the emergency meeting tomorrow. If Hardy and Giselle want a war, then we'll give them a war they'll never forget. Right, Commander. To say that Carly Village was thankful for the ANF's presence, would have been a gross understatement. Ever since Australian soldiers saved the village from being attacked by bandits all those months ago and promised to protect their little village, Carly had become a firm supporter and ally of the Allied Nations forces. Despite what the Empire had told them prior to their evacuation, the people of Carly were surprised to see just how friendly and helpful these barbarians from beyond the gate were. They never asked for compensation, nor did they ask the villagers to swear their allegiance to them. If anything, the ANF offered to protect the village and even rebuild what the bandits had destroyed. By comparison, the Empire hadn't even sent a descent group of veterans to protect them. Needless to say, the villagers who proudly called Carly the home felt rather insulted by the way the Empire had treated them and saw no reason to continue associating themselves with Sidera. As a result, Carly basically became its own city-state, and the ANF now had another ally in the province. What had once been one of the Empire's major ship repair facility on the mighty Tyran River, was now under the dominion of the Otherworlders. But this was not all that came from this switch. Located in the shipyard were two vessels that were under construction when the order to evacuate was given. The two ships in question had been ordered by a merchant in Sidera, and they were intended to carry goods and people from the capital to the coastal territories. But with Carly breaking away from the Empire, those ships were now going to be used for something else completely. The ANF bought the two ships off Carly and paid with a sack of dragon scales. Much to the disbelief and glee of the town elders, who were happy to give away the ship for 3 times they were actually worth. The ANF took control of the uncompleted vessels and began to make some minor alterations to them. A diesel generator was installed to provide power to the new water jets that had been fitted, while the deck was rebuilt to allow a pair of M61 autocannons and 50 cal machine guns to be fitted. Ballistic armor was fitted at key points and covered the exposed top decks, while a basic radar and sonar system was fitted on each ship. Eventually, the two uncompleted merchant ships had become what could be best described as river monitors, and were officially commissioned into the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force just 3 months after being bought. JDS Shinano and JDS Tone were by default the largest vessels the ANF had on the Tyran River, with the Shinano acting as flagship for the naval contingent. They would be tasked with patrolling the river, as well as support any operations taking place along the banks. There was also the unintentional psychological effect both Shinano and Tome had when the Falmart natives saw them sailing unopposed on the Tyran River. For some, the two ships had them feel a sense of comfort and security. While for those still loyal to the Empire, they were a stern reminder of just who were truly in control of province. This morning though, the Shinano sailed alone down the Trian. The vessel nearing the end of its week-long patrol and currently on course to the Ginza anchorage. Over the last several days, the River Monitor had patrolled the Tyran and made a few courtesy call to villages who fell under the dominion of the Italica Free State. as well as visited the recently complete Ilvermorny, a forward operation base which had been established by the coalition and was currently under the control of the United States Marines. Once at Ginza, Shinano would be refueled and restocked before being sent out on another week-long patrol. From the bridge of his vessel, Captain Edejima Guro sat in his chair and sipped what was now his fourth cup of coffee for that night. Though upgraded, the Shinano still lacked certain features that were normally found on more advanced vessels back home. Mainly, a private quarters for the commanding officer himself. It was not like he felt he was too good to sleep in the same room with the rest of his crew, it was more of the fact that a couple of them snored like a freight train going through a tunnel, and if he was not going to sleep, he might as well stayed on the bridge. "When are you due in port?" Captain Guro asked his second-in-command, his bloodshot eyes not even bothering to look at the younger man as he spoke. "2 more hours, sir, Lieutenant." Commander Mizuki Nagano replied, as he took a sip from his own mug of coffee. "It would be good to get back to base. Would be better to be able to sleep in my own bed and not to hear you snoring," joked Guro, as he got up from his seat and walked towards his 21C, "Looks like we another uneventful patrol under our belts. Not that I am complaining." "Agreed," Nagano replied. "Less paperwork to do." "Sir, radar is picking up an unknown contact," a sailor suddenly announced from his station. "It's moving at less than 3 knots and is coming out from the tributary." "Could be one of the American fast craft," Guro reasoned, as it was common knowledge that the Americans had vessels of their own in this section of the river. "Negative, sir," the sailor replied. "It's too big." Sighing heavily, Guro replied. "Send up the drone. Let's see who it is." Within few minutes, a small, helicopter, drone was launched of the rear deck of the Shinano. The sun was just starting to crest the horizon as the small craft flew off to investigate the unknown vessel. On the bridge, Guro, Nagano and the drone's operator watched the live feed said craft was transmitting back. Within a few minutes, the small unmanned aircraft came upon a sight that stunned everyone. For on the river, was a burnt-out hull of a ship that was slowly being pulled along by the current. This was quite curious, as they had not received any reports of any Allied vessels engaging Imperial ships during the night. Under the orders of Guro, the drone pilots lowered their aircraft towards the crippled vessel and began to scan it with its camera. It was then that the camera caught sight of something that had them absolutely stunned. There were 2 individuals laying on what was left of the upper deck. The dirty rags that covered their bodies confirmed that these persons were in fact, slaves. "By Shinto," gasped Guro, "get us to those survivors, top speed." "Ryokai, Taicho, yes, Captain," answered Nagano, flipping the switching, causing the vessel to increase its speed. "What you think, Captain?" "Possible survivors from those ships Americans destroyed a few days ago." "Don't know, but if they're from Ginza, then it's our duty to rescue them. Contact Fort Ginza and inform them of our situation. Helm, set course to intercept." "Sir, the Americans have 2 vessels 5 minutes away," Nagano informed his commanding officer. "I suggest we call in their assistance just in case this is a trap." "Duly noted," the JMSDF officer replied, before ordering the comm officer to do just that. Within moments, the Shinano increased speed and began an intercept course towards the mystery vessel, completely unaware of just what they would find. The cold morning air was pierced by the call for morning prayer coming from the base mosque as Indonesian forces and peacekeepers from Qatar took part in the daily Salat al-Fajr. It was an event that usually signaled the beginning of the day for the residents of nearby Alnistown. As this was going, another supply convoy from Japan came through the gate and made its way towards the main storage facility. While an Australian convoy made its way back into the base after a all-night patrol of the area. Helicopters could be heard flying out from Alnis airfield in the distance, while a pair of Indian patrol craft slowly cruise out of the Ginza Canal and towards the Tiran River. Basically, it was just another typical morning on Alnis Hill. Yet in this early hour, one could find a long line of hungry Marines and soldiers waiting to eat breakfast. There were actually several mess halls located within the walls of Ginza and they all catered to the thousands of military personnel that called the base home. This one in particular catered to both Japanese and American troops and already, service was in full swing. Scrambled eggs, hotcakes and bacon was the main course, while troops had the option to wash it all down with either coffee or orange juice. In the dining area, both Japanese and American personnel ate their meals, and although the two groups mostly kept to themselves, there were few tables where both sides interacted. Such was the case with 3rd Recon, as the joint task force would usually eat together every morning, and today was no different. "So I heard Atami is flying out to Sadera today," Kuwahara commented, as he sipped his mug of coffee. "I heard that too," replied William. "Apparently the cocktail princess requested that he be there for some party she is having. Would explain why he's not stuffing his face with the rest of us." Puller added on, as the Marine took another bite out of his eggs. "What's so important about this party anyway?" "Well, my government is sending a trade mission in an attempt to win over some of the senators," the sergeant major explained. "There are a number of them that are against this war, but don't have any real power compared to the noble houses that are still calling to continue the war. That reminds me, I heard a rumor that the 160th is going to be coming through the gate this week," Santo stated casually, which caught the attention of almost everyone there. "You're kidding," Shino exclaimed. "The Nightstalkers are coming through." "Who are the Nightstalkers?" Kurata asked curiously, genuinely puzzled by his friend's reactions. "Remember the Kazakhstan raid against Makhmudov and Bahirov?" Williams asked the young man. "Yay. Well, they were the guys who flew the helicopters. The air expert D when it comes to nighttime operations, and usually work closely with groups like SEALs, Ghost Recon, and even Delta Force," the Marine explained. "I have not seen them since our tour in Yugoslavia." "That's so cool," Shino squealed out, before she chugged down the last of her coffee. Excited at the idea of possibly working alongside both U.S. Marines and the Nightstalkers. But while the members of 3rd Recon continued on with their breakfast and small banter, the leader of said group was busily getting ready to undertake a new mission. Textiles. Check. Pots and pans. Check. Care package for Pina. Double check, replied Eric, just as the last of the items were loaded onto the V-22. "Well, that looks like everything," Ambassador's assistant Toto remarked, just as the last of the items were going with him to the Jade Palace. "It's certainly gonna go a long way when I finally meet with some of these noble houses. Besides, it beats using strong-arm tactics. Ambassador, everything is secure. All we need is to get you on board and we'll be off," Atami told the diplomat, just as the Marine Corps aircraft powered up its engines. "Attention," barked Eric, as he saw Centurion himself coming to them. "At ease, men," said Centurion, as he saw Atami, Eric and Min standing straight. "So, I see that you guys are ready for your trip to Sadera." "That's affirmative, sir," answered Eric. "All has been packed up and ready to go." "Good," said Centurion. "Now, remember, men, this mission is really important. The leaders of the ANF will be watching your progress, so don't screw it up, or I'll have your hides busted to the sub-privates and sended to the North Pole, got that?" "Yes, sir," answered the soldiers and the Marine. "Now, then, Atami, your job is to prepare that demonstration we're gonna show at the party to those senators. This will be the proof they need to finally understand why the war is already lost by the Empire." "Yes, sir," answered Atami. "Eric, your job will be acting as military attaché. You're already familiar with this job, but don't get flashy. After all, you'll be right at the enemy's capital, so you'll better keep it low profile." "Yes, sir." "Min, you've got different assignment, this one in the district of Sadera called Akusho." "What's that?" "It's their so-called red light district, or the slums. That's where the Imperials keep their demi-humans, as well the poor. The place is also known as Trouble Town. It's been controlled by organized crime families, as well the brothels." "Sounds like mine kind of place," smiled Min. "Don't worry, sir, I'll be alright. After all, Colonel Mitchell is also flying there." "Yes, he and his ghosts are there, alright. They'll met up with you once you've reached the gates of Akusho. After that, you'll be maintaining contact with Eric, who'll assist you from Jade Palace, where our embassy is located." "Yes, sir." "Well, that about it, gentlemen. I'll be joining you shortly in Jade Palace garden party, once I've done with the things here. There are several important work I need to accomplish in Sadera personally, under the request of the Big Three. Now, get going." With a nod, the Japanese ambassador's assistant boarded the Osprey along with a contingent of soldiers from the JSDF under the command of Atami and Eric. A few meters away, a second Osprey loaded up with U.S. personnel and men also came to life, and within moments, the two fast transports were airborne and en route to the imperial capital. At morning, Yao and Nayu came to the gates of Fort Ginza. "What can I do for you, ladies?" asked the Japanese captain. "We would like to meet General Prime," said Nayu, handing him the card Centurion gave them. "He told us to come here." Said the captain, looking at the card. "I see. You're those two elves General Prime told us about. Wait, just a moment." He then picked up his radio. "HQ, this is Captain Nakoda," he said. "I've got here two elves that General Prime has told us about." "Yeah, they're here." "Right, understood." He then put down his radio and turned to elves. "General Prime said that he's got some urgent business to take care of," he said, "but he ordered to escort you two to the headquarters. Please, follow the sergeant, he'll take you there." "Thank you," answered the women and followed the Japanese sergeant. Then, two ambulances attached to the nearby military hospital drove through the gates with a speed, their red LED lights flashing as every so often they would sound their fog horns to alert persons to their approach. Following them was the jeep with Centurion Prime in it. The two Japanese soldiers just shrugged them off as they got with elves into their jeep and drove towards the ANF headquarters. Meanwhile, at the Ginza anchorage, there was a buzz of activity. An Indian hovercraft navigated its way through the canal before its pilot came up onto the shoreline and approached a nearby hangar. Expertly manipulating the controls, the Indian crew guided the craft towards the prefabricated structure where a team of medical personnel waited with stretchers and other pieces of medical equipment. No sooner had the hovercraft powered down, the doors opened and the medics on the ground ran up to help the crew inside. Moments later, stretchers emerged from said hovercraft and the naval personnel that were there carried them to the hangar just as the two ambulances arrived on scene. In total, 3 stretchers had been on board the hovercraft, and on each of them, rested individuals who showed signs of both malnutrition and physical abuse. They were dirty and gave off a horrible, as if they had not showered in weeks and wore dirty rags. It was clear to see that these individuals had been slaves, but there was more to them that met the eye. One of the would-be slaves, a male, had features that were not normally found on any male Falmart native, as he had physical features that were normally found on persons from Japan. Within minutes of their arrival, the 3 now former slaves were loaded onto the ambulances and were immediately whisked away towards the base hospital. What happened in the next 24 hours would determine just what would come next. "Where did you found them, Captain?" asked Centurion Guro. "About several miles from Carly, sir," answered Guro. "We can't pinpoint from where they came from, but it's quite possible that they're survivors from those imperial ships our forces ambushed earlier at Tyran River. But if those slaves survived," said Centurion, "there could be more. I want your ship and tome to search the river from side to side, from all streams and branches. If there are more survivors, you must find them." "Hi, Wakarimashita." "Yes, understood," saluted Guro, while Centurion got into his jeep and drove away back to base. Meanwhile, the Ginza base hospital was a buzz of activity by this point. The ambulances that had been sent out just an hour ago returned with their new passengers. No sooner had the first vehicle entered the compound and reversed into the bay, a team of medical staff swarmed the rear of the ambulance and proceeded to offload the young man that laid in the stretcher and carried him into the intensive care unit. The boy could not have been no more than 16 years old, and his 2 would-be companions were just about the same age. All 3 showed signs of extreme abuse and numerous lacerations about their bodies. Their almost skeletal frames was evidence that these individuals were not in any way well fed, and all were showing advanced stages of hypothermia. Clearly these teens had been through hell and back, and the fact that all 3 had Asian features made this all the more troubling. Even before the doctors got to work, fingerprints and hair samples were taken so as to identify just who they were and, if possible, locate their families back home. But for now the main focus was on saving their lives, as all 3 were in bad shape. The next several hours would determine if they would live, or go home in coffins. "What's the conditions, Doc?" asked Centurion. "I cannot promise you miracles, sir," answered Indian doctor. "These men are only lucky to be alive. They've practically nothing more than skin and bones, plus, they've got advanced stages of hypothermia. It's unknown if they'll ever wake up or die. I want at least one of them alive and talking," Doc, said Centurion, these men are our only lead to where other captives from Ginza are been held. If we can find out where they came from, we can also find and rescue others as well. I understand that, sir, answered the doctor. I'll do everything we can, but I can't promise anything, their chances are quite low. Then do your work, doctor, said Centurion, inform me, if anyone at least waken up, I'll be in touch. Yes, General, answered the doctor, then Centurion turns and leaves the hospital. Tell me, young mage, Yao asked Lele, as they left the staff room, do you think they will help our people? Lele just replied, the other worlders like to think before they act. They will need some time to think about what you told them before they make a decision. Yao began to feel a little more anxious at this point, and it clearly began to show on her face. Something that did not go unnoticed by the teenager. Would you like to get something to drink? Lele asked the older women, attempting to get their minds off of her current situation. Yao was a bit surprised by the young girl's offer, but with no other option but to wait on the other worlder's reply, the dark elf decided to go along with the mage. If only just to pass the time. Back at the room, Centurion turned to other commanders. Well, gentlemen, he said, it seems that our expectations were correct. We've got another dragon in the nearby area, and it looks like its mate was the same flame dragon we slayed earlier. So, the question is, how do we respond? I don't know, replied Respati, as the Indonesian commander got up from his seat and walked up to the giant map of Falmart that was on display in the conference room. Visually scanning the map, Respati stated, the Black Forest is a good distance away, and even then, it's technically inside the Kingdom of Elb. That should not be too much of a problem, replied Batischa. King Duran is more or less on our side. He still may not like the idea of our forces entering his kingdom, Hazama stated, as he too walked up to the map. The main reason he agreed to assist us, is because we told him that we had no interest in invading his or any of the other kingdoms. If we suddenly show up near his kingdom with a large force, then he may believe that not only have we gone back on our word, but we are going to invade his kingdom. The last thing we need is another front in this conflict, especially against an ally, all because of a misunderstanding. And even then, we still don't know if this Dushi is telling us the truth. Then the only way to find out if she is telling us the truth, is to take a look for ourselves. Colonel Singh suggested, as the Indian officer spoke up. We should conduct a recon flight over the Black Forest to see if there is any signs of this Aquadrico. If this creature is as destructive as Miss Dushi says it is, then there should be signs of this devastation. Even if there is such a creature, we really don't have any obligation to assist Miss Dushi or her people. Brig. General Thomas Gideon of the Australian Army added, this may sound cold, but our main focus should be on locating and rescuing those who were taken from Ginza. I am certain that we are all aware that we currently have 3 individuals laying in the base hospital who have been identified as persons who were taken by the Empire. I am well aware of that fact, replied Centurion, but we also have an obligation to assist any and all allies we have made in the special region. We may not have direct ties with this Dushi clan, but they do reside within the Kingdom of Elban. Who is to say that this Aquadrico would not soon become a threat to the rest of that kingdom and its people? It may only be a matter of time before King Duran requests help from us. Beside, I doubt any of us here like the idea of quite possibly leaving people to die, all because we refused to take them seriously. Gibbs chimed in, we could have one of the predators do a flyover of the region and send us a live feed. Then it's settled, said Centurion, we'll prepare the operation to locate and destroy this Aquadrico and save those elves. Colonel Respati, I want you to send 4 predator drones to Elb Kingdom. Have them equipped with the latest surveillance and recon gear and external fuel tanks for increasing flight. Search every nearby rivers and forests, but find that creature. Yes, General, saluted Respati. General Keating, you are in charge of planning the upcoming operation, continued Centurion. I want our best units to participate in it, including our special forces and air force. If that creature have a nest, we'll find it and blow it to Kingdom Come. It would take at least a week to prepare the operation, sir, said Keating, not to mention to gather our units, with several of them are already in Sedera. You shall have the week, answered Centurion, but make it quick, Joshua, lives here at stake. We shall call this operation, St. George, in honor of St. George the Dragon Slayer. Yes, I agree with that, said General Zhukov. And finally, General Hazama, said Centurion, I want you to send a messenger to King Duran. Tell him about what's going on at Black Forest. Surely if this Aquadrico terrorized the elves, then he can also threatening the citizens of the kingdom as well. Yes, General Prime, said Hazama, I shall prepare a note to Duran immediately. All right, gentlemen, said Centurion, we have at least 1 week to prepare Operation St. George. The main responsible for its development and implementation is General Keating. Now, let's get to work, we don't have time to lose. Suddenly, a Japanese officer burst into the room. General Prime, the young man said in between breath, the hospital just called. What's the condition of the patients? Asked Centurion. A somber expression suddenly came upon the soldier's face. I am sorry, sir, but one passed away while in ICU. And the other two? Only one has woken up. The young man replied. He is awake and talking. Tell Dr. Rama, we'll be right at Opital, ordered Centurion, before he and other commanders made their way out of the admin building and towards the base hospital. Several hours later, Centurion and other commanders returned to the staff room. According to this map, he probably came from the Minotauro Provence, Gibbs stated, as he brought out one of the maps that had been provided to the coalition by King Duran. It's much further north from our current theater of operations. But intel provided by Duran stated that the Empire really had no mining operations in that region, hence not a likely location for slaves to be sent. Respati explained, as he and the rest of the coalition commanders examined the map. Does not mean they aren't any. Gideon replied, we can't expect Duran to know about every mining operation and slave camp the Empire has. As far as we know, it could just a new operation Sidera started. Which makes sense, like the colonel said, it is much further north and far away from our area of operations. It is possible that the Empire is actively trying to keep out people as far away from the Wat as possible so as to prevent us from rescuing them. The leader of the Indian contingent reasoned, probably in an attempt to spite us. I mean, by now the Saturans know we are actively trying to locate and rescue everyone they took from Japan. I have to agree, replied Hazama, as it was a logical conclusion to come to. Over the last few weeks, intelligence gathered by Special Forces teams in the field and information provided by the princess have suggested that the Empire has been moving large numbers of slaves to the very edge of their domain. If the ANF did not act soon, then there was a very strong chance that many of those who were taken from Ginza would never be located, but we still need to locate this mine before we can do anything. Normal drones would take too long to reach Minotauro. Gibbs notes, as the location was much further than where they normally operated, but one of our jets should be able to make it there in a couple hours. I could have one of my jets up in the air in an hour, Respati announced, as he knew that the flankers his country had sent over had also been conducting recon flights over the southern coast of Falmart and the numerous colonies the Empire had there. Very well, agreed Centurion. You are cleared to conduct a recon flight over Minotauro. Once we locate this camp, then we can act accordingly. General, said a Japanese female soldier as she came to staff room, Watchtower just radioed that a contingent of Princess Pina's knights are on their way. They said they have some important documents to give you. How long before they arrive? Hazama asked the young woman. They were on horseback. Watchtower said they should be entering Alnistown in half an hour. The soldier explained. Call. Mahmud, commander of the Peacekeeper Force, has already been alerted and has sent a contingent to escort them to the base. Very good, replied Centurion. General Hazama and I will meet them when they arrive. Tower to goalkeeper, you are cleared to take off. Copy that, Tower. The American pilot slowly began to apply power, causing his single-engine aircraft to accelerate down the air base's sole runway. Just hours before, elements of the USAF 489th Attack Squadron had received orders to deploy one of their aircraft to the Kingdom of Elb. Specifically the Black Forest near the border with Sidera. This was an operation that was not unfamiliar to the men and women of the 489th, as since their deployment to the special region, the unit had conducted and taken part in numerous reconnaissance operations and close air support missions for the coalition. Normally, the 489th had a rigid timetable and schedule laid out for when each of their assets would be deployed and just where they would be deployed to. This system usually allowed the squadron to cover as much territory as possible, without overlapping with other units. But today, they would be conducting what could be best described as a snap operation. As command had received information and needed to verify that said information was indeed valid. With final confirmation from the tower, the MQ 9 inches Reaper accelerated down the black tarmac, and within a few moments, the single-engine drone was airborne and retracting its landing gear into its body. The small yet powerful Honeywell turboprop engine propelling the unmanned aerial vehicle to its operational altitude, before its operator directed the craft towards its intended area of operations. Whatever business or event that was taking place near the town center at that period of time, had suddenly come to a halt. Whatever sale or business transaction that was in the process of being completed was now on pause, while persons who were browsing the many small businesses soon found their attention drawn to the new spectacle that was happening before them. For now, riding down the main street on horses, were members of the Rose Order of Knights. Their ornate and well-polished armor a stark contrast to the uniforms worn by the other-worlder soldiers they were so used to seeing by this point. Some who saw the knights looked on in both awe and confusion, while others could only look on in disgust and anger. Many of Alnistown's residents had lived on lands that were controlled by imperial lords and barons, many of whom were quite corrupt and abused their powers to take advantage of those who lived under their domain. It was safe to assume that the people of Alnistown did not view the Rose Knight in high regard. Just what in the name of Hardy were their imperial brats doing here? Meanwhile, Beefeater felt as if thousands of eyes were suddenly burning holes through her and the rest of her team. Which was not exactly far from the truth. The nobles that made up the small contingent knew that they were literally in the heart of enemy territory, and those who lived there would not hold the empire in high regard. Let alone a group of knights that were made up of the children of some of said noble families. Probably the only thing that prevented the populace from straight up mobbing the knights, were the fact that they were currently being escorted through the town by other-worlder soldiers that for some reason, wore blue helmets rather than the dark green they were used to seeing. Were these some kind of special units? Suddenly, Beefeater soon found herself on the receiving end of a rotten tomato attack. As 3 of the rotten produce found their mark on her face and body armor, almost knocking the knight off her mount and sending her to the ground. Both the knights and the Quatar escorts tensed up at the sight, as they suddenly expected the crowd to rush them and attack the nobles. But it was clear to see that the populace were just as surprised by the attack as the knights and peacekeepers were. Wiping away the disgusting mess from her face, Beefeater chose to ignore this blatant act of aggression and continued to lead her unit towards the other-worlder fortress. She did have a mission to complete, and the noble woman intended to complete it. Eventually, the knights were able to make it to the fort itself without being used as targets for rotten produce, and were completely taken aback by the impressive walls that surrounded it. They were massive. By flair, these walls were even greater than those that protected Sidera. Just how were these other worlders even able to build such things so fast? What were their secrets? Eventually the Rose Knights were led into the fortress and towards the administration building, where they were to meet with the coalition commanders. Princess Pina said that you may find these useful, Beefeater stated, as the knight gave Hazama and Centurion the pouch that carried the numerous scrolls and documents the royal had managed to covertly acquire. She said these would most likely assist you in your mission to rescue your people. Upon receiving the pouch, Hazama and the other commanders began to look over its contents. It was an absolute treasure trove of information. Names of known nobles who were in the business of slavery, names of their associates, routes that slave caravans were known to take. But the big one was a detailed map that showed the locations of slave camps that not even King Duran knew about. Obviously, most of it would have to be verified, but the commander had no reason to believe that the princess had any reason to feed them any false information. Hell, she was quite possibly the only member of the Sateran imperial family that knew just how dire the consequences would be if she was caught lying to the coalition. Her Majesty has been trying to gather as much information as she can to help you on your mission, Beefeater told the commanders, as she and her knights shifted rather uncomfortably. Despite their loyalties to the princess and understood just what was at stake, the nobles could not help but to feel as if they were committing the highest form of treason by meeting with the other worlder commanders. You do realize that we will have to verify that what you have given us is accurate, right? The Marine Corps general told the young woman. There was a pause before the knight replied. Pina knows that you may not believe her, but she assures you that as a member of the royal house, she swears that her sources are reliable. We will be the judge of that, Centurion told the group, before having the armed guards escort them out of the conference room. No sooner had the metal door clicked shut behind the exiting knights, Respati just looked up from the assembled parchments before he asked. I think we may need more aircraft for this. Yes, said Centurion, as he looked through documents, I think you do. Send 4 Su-30 there, to locate and find this place. Who's the owner? Mudron, huh. Now, where did I've heard that name before? Probably one of the nobles we've captured during the Ginza incident, guessed Gibbs. Maybe, said Centurion, but it doesn't matter. What matter is, that we must find and rescue those people at Minotaro province. I want General Keating to work on the plans of second operation codenamed, Raven Claw. The job will be to capture the owner of the mine and rescue those slaves. Yes, General, answered Keating, don't worry, I can work on both plans at the same time. Although we need more information about the Mudron family. I can get those, answered Centurion, in a few days, I'll be going to Sidera for a special operations we'll be conducting there. While at the same time, I can contact a specifical person, who would gladly tell us everything we want to know. Are you sure, this man can be trusted? Asked Hazama, surely, he might backstab you, sir. Yes, that's the danger I must endure, answered Centurion, however, I believe, that I can offer him something he cannot refuse, for which he'll gladly cooperate with us. With hundreds of people arriving in Alnistown on a weekly basis, Countess Mayui had offered to assist the coalition to deal with the growing population. With many of the town's new residents being demi-humans, both Mayui and Kane thought it would be a good idea to have some of their maids visit the new settlement to help the new residents assimilate into their new homes. Not surprisingly, many of these demi-humans were survivors of the Great Northern War between the Empire and the warrior bunny tribes that once thrived in the northern regions of Falmart. Despite being known for being skillful fighters and brutal warriors, the bunny tribes of the north lived in peace. Every once in a while, the tribes would go to war over land or food if times got desperate, but for the most part they generally got along well with one another and rarely had a reason to interfere with any of the human villages and towns that were known to them. But that all changed a few years ago, when the imperial army led by Crown Prince Zorzel marched into their lands and began to decimate entire villages and towns. It was during this war the bunny tribes united and soon began to live up to their reputation of being deadly warriors. The imperial army suffered horrible casualties and the northern lands were covered with imperial blood. But no matter just how many legions were decimated, more and more would replace the lost ranks. It was not long before Zorzel began a scorched earth policy that saw numerous towns and their inhabitants burned to the ground. Thousands of their kind who had been captured were either killed or sent back to Sidera as slaves and trophies for the prince. But the biggest act of treason against their kind came when the leader of the United Tribes and Queen gave herself to the prince and sold out her people. The battle that came afterwards saw the end of the bunny tribes in the north, and those who were fortunate enough to escape fled south in an event that became known as the Turp Est Dolorem Magni, the Great Shameful Sorrow. They were all forced to leave their homes and everything else they knew because of their former queen and were now being hunted by the empire. Mamina was just one of the lucky few who were able to make it to the formal lands with her mother, her father having been killed trying to help his family escape. Upon being taken in by the formal clan, Mamina decided to repay the clan's kindness by becoming a maid for Count Formal and his family, and it was not long before she became one of the clan's more trusted servants. She loved her new life and loved her countess as if the child were her own. A sentiment that was shared by many of those who worked under the head maid Kane, whom Amina saw as her second mother. Now the warrior bunny maid was in Alnistown with a few others helping the many warrior bunnies that were now calling Alnis their home. But right now, the maid was in the town market gathering vegetables for later. Apparently she had stumbled upon some warrior bunnies that were from her clan up north and had planned to get together later that evening and even cook some of their traditional meals. But the bunny girl was not alone, as she was accompanied by the clan's newest maid. A fellow warrior bunny who had arrived in Italica just some months ago and was proving herself to be a valuable addition to the clan. "Oh, look at these mushrooms, Kenya," Mamina said to her young companion, as the duo came upon a cart that was selling them. "They look so good. They would most certainly go well with the meal tonight. Kenya, the older maid stated, only to realize that her young companion had not replied. Mamina was about to say something else when she noticed that the attention of the young maid was not focused on the produce in front of them, but rather the group of American Marines who were also buying some fruit from another vendor nearby. The young bunny girl had a look of wonder in her eyes, as she saw the men pay for their items before walking off. Something that did not go unnoticed by the older maid, who could not help but to smile at her young friend's actions. It was not the first time it had happened after all. You know, Kenya, they would not hurt you if you went up to talk to them. Oh, the young bunny maid gasped in surprise. Sorry, were you saying something? Mamina just giggled before she replied. I think out of all of us, you may be the other worlder's biggest fan. The young maid blushed at this statement, an action which caused Mamina to smile. Kenya had come a long way since she first arrived in Italica. It was clear to see that the bunny girl was indeed an escaped slave when she was first found by one of the maids, but when asked just how she managed to escape, Kenya would only say that someone had rescued her from her master before setting her free. But nothing more. It was clear to see that her time in captivity was hellish, as her body covered in bruises, and although she never said so, it was obvious she had been sexually abused numerous times. Mamina decided to take the young girl under her wing, and though it was hard at times, the bunny warrior was able to build a friendly relationship with her new friend. She gave Kenya a small hug before her eyes caught sight of a familiar face. For now, walking through the crowded market, was the young mage Lele, but she was not alone. For walking with her and with a sandwich in hand, was a dark elf. The formal maid could not believe that a dark elf was in Alnus, as it was well known dark elves normally did not interact with persons outside of their respective clans. Curious, the maid called out to the mage as both she and her young companion walked up to the duo. It's good to see you again, Lele, Mamina said cheerfully. It's good to see you as well, the teen replied, albeit with her trademark emotionless demeanor. Have you been well? I am fine, I am just here to help some of the refugees settle in, the maid replied, before she motioned to her companion and said, this is Kenya. She is one of our newer maids that I have been training for the last few months. The younger bunny girl just gave a shy wave before Mamina asked. Who is your new friend? This is Yao Dushi, Lele replied. She is here to ask the ANF for help. We are just waiting for them to reply. Yao, for her part, just stood there silently as she eyed the two warrior bunnies before her. The elf woman was well aware of the reputation the warrior bunnies had and just how deadly they could be. To see two of them here up close was a bit unnerving to say the very least. So where are you two heading? Mamina asked her teen. Yao has some questions about the other worlders, so I am taking her to the town library to help answer her questions. Well, we have some time to kill until later. Care if we join you? That would be a good idea, the mage replied, before the new group made their way to their new destination. But while this was going on, a mixed squadron of unmanned drones and Indonesian Su-35 fighters were being prepared for their next operation. Chapter 27, Shadows of Akusho. Despite technically located in the capital, the Jade Palace was more or less located far away from most of the important mansions and government buildings. This made it the perfect location for Pina to hold many social gatherings with those who opposed the war with the other worlders. Its location also made it easy for said other worlders to occupy the massive structure and use it as a diplomatic center of sorts. Despite their obvious technological advantage, there were many who did not like the idea of basically jolly stomping such an underdeveloped civilization because of its leaders. Besides, there was still the issue of those who were still being held as slaves, and any possible allies that could help recovering those who were taken was welcomed. Over the last few weeks, Princess Pina had been assisting the members of the ANF move into the limestone structure. Already several of the palace's rooms had been renovated to house members of the coalition and their diplomats. While the princess herself had held a number of social gatherings as a means to introduce some of the noble houses to the other worlders. This led to many interesting interactions and exchanges between said nobles and the big three ambassadors. But it was during these meetings that Pina was reminded just how cunning, if not devious, the ANF could be. As hostile nobles soon became docile and more hospitable toward the big three diplomats when they discovered family members they once thought had been killed when they marched into Ginza, were alive currently being held in camps across the gate. They were even more surprised to discover that the other worlders were willing to release the captured nobles back to their families. But only if certain requests were met, that is. In a clearing located just a few miles away from the Jade Palace, Princess Pina and a few of her more loyal knights could only look on in awe as the other worlder flying machines came in and landed just a few meters away from her group. The sight of the two ospreys hovering before her reminded the princess and her companions just who was really in control of the continent and why she wanted to work with the ANF. Within a few minutes, the two impressive aircraft touched down and their occupants began to file out. Taking defensive positions around the landing site, the Marines pointed their weapons into the tree line. Moments later, Ambassador's assistant Toto emerged from the second osprey with Atami and approached the royal. "Princess." Toto addressed the royal before him. "I hope that you have been well since our last meeting." "I have," Pina replied, as she noticed the crates being offloaded from one of the ospreys. "Are those for the party tomorrow?" "Indeed." The Japanese diplomat replied with a grin. "Some of the finest items and wares my world has to offer. From what you have said about some of these nobles, what's in these crates should go a long way in winning them over to our cause." "Indeed, it should," the leader of the Rose Knights replied, knowing full well just how much the nobles of Sidera prized such exotic items from faraway lands. She then leaned towards Atami with an hopeful expression and asked, Did you bring what I asked for?" Yeah," the Japanese soldier replied, as he went into the crate and took out a small box. "Riza sends her regards, by the way." There was almost a childlike glee in the princess's eyes, as she took said box and opened it to see its contents. A small squeal almost escaped her lips. Before closing she replied, "Thank you very much. Shall we be going?" With nod, the ambassador and his small entourage followed the princess and her knights toward some carriages which would take them to the Jade Palace. But while the Japanese would be going with Pina, the Marines that traveled on the second Osprey returned to their aircraft. "Where are they going?" Pina asked the Atami, a puzzled expression forming on her face as she saw the tilt rotors slowly lift off. "They are not coming with us." "No," Atami replied. "They were only here to make sure nothing happened when we arrived." "So where are they heading now?" "Honestly, they never told us," Toto replied. "But if I have to guess, those Americans have their own objective in Sidera." Once again, Pina began to have sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. Just what were the other worlders up to? Up until now, an hostile enemy force had not entered the Sidera for almost 500 years, and even then it took a year-long siege to destroy the city defenses. Now there were enemies of the Empire walking within the imperial capital, and more were to come. With that fact in mind, Pina and her knights mounted their horses and began the long trek back to the palace with their new guest in tow. Meanwhile in the air, the Osprey that were carrying the Marines made its way to its secondary location. Though an unofficial ceasefire currently existed, the ANF leadership knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire went back on the offensive. The Empire was currently in the process of rebuilding its military after the heavy losses it had suffered at Alnus. It was only a matter of time before the Emperor thinks that he could defeat the allied nations' forces and send his new army to drive back the other worlders. An action that would result in another slaughter and possibly lead to the destabilization of the imperial government. Considering how things apparently worked in the Empire, it was not too far out there to believe that it could possibly lead to a civil war in Sidera. If peace talks were to fail, then the ANF needed to have the ability to strike down the imperial leadership and its supports in one swift blow. As a result, Operation Shadow was been initiated. Over the last few weeks, Special Forces teams had begun to secretly enter Sidera and set up a covert base within the city walls. Their task was to conduct recon missions into the city itself and relay any and all information they acquired back to Ginza. Thus elements of the 3rd Recon Battalion, 3rd Marine Division had been deployed to take part in the operation. They would be joining members of the Filipino 1st Scout Ranger Regiment that had already been operating just outside the capital for a week, scouting possible targets. While members of the Japanese Special Forces Group Commandos were in the process of locating a suitable base of operations within Sidera itself. The arrival of the Force Recon team would bring up their total number 75, and it was expected that Australian SAS would be joining them soon. But for not, the main focus would be to locate and link up with the other teams to secure a new base. Another phase in the ANF mission in Special Region was about to begin. Back at the Atami group, seeing the soldiers a bit uncomfortable around him, Ambassador Russell gestured to the case of manga carefully translated by volunteers at Alnus. "That's rather unusual reading material, wouldn't you say, Lieutenant?" Atami had no interest in the princess's fascination with yaoi. It was an unfortunate effect of her contact with Riza, Atami judged. What she judged as art was well outside his tastes. Well, he was a delivery boy. He didn't have to read the stuff. But still, a senior diplomat, a foreign diplomat at that, had addressed him with a question. "Those kinds of stories are not my thing, sir. I'm afraid it's something my wife introduced Her Imperial Highness to. She calls it art." Russell casually picked up one of the books and thumbed through it with a smile as he noticed some of the edits inside. Putting it back down, he looked at Atami with a fatherly smile. "Your eyes look like they're about to fall out of your head, Lieutenant. While I agree it isn't exactly my cup of tea, I've seen much worse things in my day. And art is subjective, they say. One man's trash is another's masterpiece. And who are we to judge but for ourselves?" He shot Atami an appraising look. "So, you're the hero of Ginza. And the locals are calling you the savior of Italica. So, tell me, Mr. Atami. Is it that you like going where angels fear to tread, or that you just can't keep out of trouble?" "Definitely the latter, sir," Kurokawa remarked as Atami mentally squirmed. "I'll say," Kuribayashi agreed. "Good," Russell declared. "I've got no use for a man who deliberately goes looking for trouble." "What about you and Mr. Sugawara?" asked Kurokawa. "Aren't you basically walking into the lion's den, as it were?" "While we trust Her Imperial Highness from personal experience, I think it's fair to say that not everyone will be so welcoming." "Very true, but we're not looking for trouble. Every step has been meticulously planned out. There's a detachment of your special security forces and a few of our Marines are already in place, waiting for us, and there are other security measures in place in the meantime." They didn't need to know that Agent Poole, from the Department of State Security, was carrying an emergency beacon in addition to a concealed heckler and Coke HK-45. Also, Captain Willis and Lieutenant Jansen had their drone, now christened Lil Rory, and carrying a rather risque portrait of the Apostle herself, trailing them, making casual circles at 30,000 feet. They would look for any signs of trouble, and if necessary, a payload of Mark 82 Mod 7 bombs would create carnage on a hostile column. It was fervently hoped such precautions would prove unnecessary, but caution was the watchword for now. In addition, a special unit from the 101st Airborne was also following them with orders to extract the two diplomats if needed. "So, what about the rest of you?" Russell asked. "What impression do you people have of this strange world we find ourselves in?" "Professionally or personally?" Kuribayashi asked, throwing a wicked look at Kurata. "Either way, Sergeant. In diplomacy, both can be very relevant to understanding the folks you're dealing with. In that case, Kurata is our resident expert at making good relations with the locals. A couple of them in particular." Kurata blushed a little and then yelped as Master Sergeant Nishina congratulated him with a slap on the back. "Are you sure you don't want me to look at your back?" Kurokawa asked with motherly concern. "It's nothing. Just a little too much sun in Italica." "Right," Shino doubted. "Anyway, Kurokawa has her own boyfriend now," Kurata replied. "That guy, Eric." "And you've got a problem with that?" asked Kurokawa. "Well, I'm not your father and I'm not your general, so your secrets are safe with me," Russell told them as they settled in, just a bit more relaxed for the rest of the journey. It was an established fact that no matter how majestic or cultured a city appeared to be on the surface, there was always a seedy that existed in the shadows, and Sedera was no different. Despite being dubbed as the most cultured and civilized city in the empire, Sedera did have its dark side that most in the upper echelons of the dominant noble houses chose to pretend did not exist. For those nobles, this dark side was known as the Akusho district, and it was not the kind of place that reflected the mythos that surrounded the imperial capital. Akusho was by far the poorest district within the imperial city, as it was located in the lowest levels of slums that existed around the city. Unlike most of the districts, Akusho was settled after the fact by persons who were too poor to acquire homes in the upper levels of the city. The streets were narrow and had little in the way of proper drainage, while the buildings that made up the majority of Akusho were a far cry from the marble palaces that dotted the rest of the city. Being one of the poorest districts in Sadera also made Akusho the perfect breeding ground of crime and criminal organizations to flourish. The Saderan government had long decided to ignore the deteriorating situation in the district, as little to no funding was ever allocated to maintain the area. Imperial patrols were practically unheard of in Akusho while social services that existed in the other districts did not exist. Add to the fact that the residents of Akusho already lived in extreme poverty and were in desperate state, it was not long before the district became known for something else. As over time, powerful crime families and syndicates emerged from the shadows and more or less took control of the district. Prostitution and extortion soon became main forms of business with Akusho, while kidnappings and rapes were a common practice for the many brothels that existed. Many of whom were operated by the very same criminal organizations, but the largest was operated by the most powerful crime family in the district. If not the most feared. The Becerra family was quite possibly one of the oldest crime families in Akusho and as a result, the most powerful. If it was illegal, illicit, morally questionable or just plain wrong, the Becerra family had their hands in it in one form or another. Even among the district's crime lords, the Becerra family was seen as the worst of the worst. Despite their less than honorable professions, there were just some lines most of the crime lords were not willing to cross. But the Becerra and their current leadership had no problems breaking these rules, once they could make a decent profit at it. Dealing in child prostitution, kidnapping individuals to force into the sex trade, indiscriminate murders, there was even a rumor that Becerra were kidnapping young girls to sell as sex slaves to certain members of the imperial family. The only thing that prevented the other crime lords from taking out the Becerra family, was the fact that they were so powerful and ruthless. It was considered suicide to even think about moving against them. No one dared cross the Becerra family, unless they knew what was good for them. But little did Becerra know, is that his own power was going to end this very night. Night had fallen over the imperial capital and once again, the brothel, Playful Elf, was in the process of getting ready to welcome that night's business. The brothel was just one of many operated by the Becerra, but it was by far the largest and popular brothels in Akusho and had a reputation of having the best quality of workers there. Many of whom were demi-humans, and it was rumored that certain members of the noble houses would frequent its facilities. The interior of the Playful Elf was the absolute definition of exorbitant luxury, a stark contrast to the extreme poverty that surrounded the building. But perfect to cater to some of the better-paying customers that were said to visit from time to time. The girls that made up the establishment's workforce were guarded closely by the Becerra family enforcers. Mainly to ensure that none of the girls escaped or tried to pocket some of the profits for their work. While most of the multi-level structure was reserved for private rooms and other special services provided by the prostitutes, the last two floors were reserved for the Becerra family enforcers and a one Angus by Lorca. A top lieutenant in the Becerra family organization and the one in charge of running the Playful Elf. Lorca was businessman and it showed in how he ran the brothel. But he was also just as ruthless as the family he worked for, and it was not uncommon for him to have one of his employees just disappear if he found her to be stealing from him. He had no time for excuses and allowed that fact to be known anytime he spoke to the girls under his care. Tonight found him once again sitting in his personal office and going over the numbers. The last few months had shown a sharp decline in the numbers of high-paying clients, but then again that was to be expected since the empire was currently at way. Either way, there were still enough numbers of horny men coming into the Playful Elf to more than make up for the lost numbers. So engrossed he was with his work, Lorca did not seem to notice the soft thuds that came from outside his door. Nor did he seem to notice the figure take aim from the rooftop behind him. And that was his last living moment, before silent shot was been heard. Nobody knew just what exactly was going on, as the Playful Elf's workforce had now gathered in the main lobby. Normally, the girls, demi-humans, would not even be allowed to leave their rooms until one of Lorca's men came to unlock their doors and escort them to the lobby, where clients would select just who they would want to spend their time with for a few hours. But today, instead of one of Lorca's goons, the women were greeted by unknown individuals dressed in strange gray uniforms, who led them from the cellars and up to the lobby. As the girls walked, they could see more and more of these strange men standing as if they were on guard, noticing that not one of Lorca's men could be seen. Well, this was most certainly odd. Normally the men under Lorca's thumb would not hesitate to make lewd remarks to them as they were brought up, but these men, they didn't do that. If anything, these strangers had looks of absolute pity for the girls. It was as if they felt sorry for them. Had something happened? Had Lorca replaced his men for new recruits? Had a rival crime family finally made a move and talked over the Becerra's family most valuable asset? Something was not right, but they did not know what. Eventually, an individual dressed in what was quite possibly the strangest attire they had ever seen and holding a equally as strange black staff, came in front of the assembled sex workers and began to address the group. "Greetings," said the strange man with a deep, authoritarian voice. "I am certain that you have noticed that none of your former employer's men were present when you were freed from your cells. That is because he and his people are no longer in charge of this establishment. This establishment is now under new ownership." There were a few gasps from the assembled group, as many of them were in complete shock. They knew very well just how protective the Becerra family was when it came to their businesses. There was a reason Becerra was feared among the citizens of the district, and this group, whoever they were, had now signed their own death warrants by claiming to have taken over the building. With so many questions flooding their minds, a beautiful woman with long blonde hair and a pair of wings on her back, stepped forward from the group and took a long drag from her pipe before she said, "And just who has supposedly taken over our home? Becerra and his men will be here once they find out someone has taken one of their business without their consent." "We are very well aware of that fact, miss," the man replied, "and I can assure you that when he and his people come, we will be waiting for them." She took another long drag before asking, "And tell me, just who do you think you are challenging the most powerful crime families in Akusho? I would like to know just who our would-be liberators are. You will find out in due time. But until then, I suggest that you all head upstairs and select your new rooms. There are going to be some changes, and the first thing is that you all are being moved from the cellars and into the final 2 levels of this building," the man explained, "so I suggest that you take whatever belongings you have and carry them to your new rooms." And with that, Scott Mitchell left the lobby to meet with the rest of the task force shadow leaders, leaving a very confused group of sex workers behind to mull over what had just happened. Out of all the possible locations that the Special Forces teams could have used, the Playful Elf was possibly the best suited for their operations. The building itself was large enough to house all their teams and equipment, while the fact it was located in Akusho made it very unlikely the Empire would ever think that an enemy base was now located in the capital itself. From here, the ANF Special Forces teams could conduct numerous recon missions inside Sedera and scout possible targets of interest, as well as locate possible HVTs just in case they needed to be dealt with in the future. But of course, that one woman from before did bring up a valid point. The SF units that were taking part in Shadow knew very well that it would only be a matter of time before Becerra and his thugs came to retake their former brothel. Prior to taking the building, the Special Forces teams learned as much as they could about this would-be crime family and knew just how ruthless they were. Many of the locals downright refused to talk about the group or its leader, while the few that did painted a picture of an individual that could have been best described as a monster. A man that feared as much as he was hated, who either got what he wanted or would make sure no one else did. Even the other criminal groups regarded Becerra as dishonorable individual, which was really saying something. As a result, elements of the 1st Scout Ranger Regiment were tasked with locating and following Becerra several days. They were to learn everything they could about the crime lord and report their findings back to the rest of the task force. It did not take an expert to realize that Becerra could become a major problem for the covert teams in the future, and with his possible links to the Imperial Court, he could become real problem real fast. Becerra's arrogance came from the belief he had that his family was the most powerful crime organization in Akusho and by default, untouchable. But tonight he was in for a rude awakening. 2 ghosts were on watch, rotating frequently with the JSDF Rangers, MARSOG, Australian SAS and their own men. Hours would pass and it would be the same night, same shit, waking up with the same smell of rotten piss in nostrils. Captain Joe Hibbard sat by the wide open window, glancing at the dirt roads. The moon was high up in the clear skies, casting its glow upon me as it reflected off the body of his MRK that he held in my hands. Screams and moans could be heard in the quiet of the night. He could hear them every day, but during the night he could hear them even more. Sometimes they would see a guy passing by in the distance, just taking a glance at their hideout and then leave, occasionally returning to take a look again. By now they have figured out the pattern. He would come out at night and occasionally check on the brothel. They're aware that there are gangs around these parts and they don't take too kindly to strangers who might possibly be their competition, but trouble is, Hibbard and his unit were no competition to those hoods. No, as a matter of fact, they weren't even on the same league. Tonight, the guy that would usually come here to check on them wasn't here this time. Instead they've had an army of self-proclaimed gangsters and pedophiles approaching Brothel's doorstep with arrogance and confidence that had Hibbard chuckling, knowing that this road will soon be known as a mass grave. All of them were different groups of ethnicities and races, with shovels, torches and forks in hand. For gangsters they sure have messed all. He also wasn't really supportive about the Empire's racial dominance complex, but if this menagerie is trying to kill him, then he suggests that they shouldn't call him a racist. Isn't that cute? Chuckled Lieutenant Hartman, who has just happened to be checking their security details. They think they'll intimidate us. Our men are all in position, sir, said Hibbard. We're ready. Then let's wait for them to do something really stupid, said Eric, and waste them. Roger that, sir, answered Hibbard. To all units, this is Sabre 6. We are Redcon 1, I say again, we are Redcon 1, multiple hostiles are positioned near the entrance. Stand by for immediate action. Sabre 6 out. Lieutenant Okada whispered into the radio. He was in charge of a JSDF Ranger platoon that they have been working with since their arrival in Akusho. With a mock smirk, Eric closed the window, grabbed his M27 as he jogged to the next room. Assassin 1 to all Assassin Victors, we are Redcon 1, establish defensive perimeters facing north, do not fire unless shot upon or told otherwise, out. He reported to the 3 fireteams within MARSOG element, his gear clicking with each rapid step. Andrew, get your .48 gun on the window. Brooks, take position in the storage room by the window, he ordered, running up to said window. Wilco. Brooks nodded, quickly organizing his gear before taking off to the next room. On my way, Andrew exclaimed quietly, rushing over to the window with his Mk-48 machine gun, but not before waking up his fellow Marine. Hey, wake up, Buttercup, Andrew whispered, lightly tapping his machine gun's buttstock against his balls. The Marine flinched from the pain, instinctively shielding his crotch with his hands. That Marine that just almost got castrated, his name is Underwood. Oh, you little piece of shit, Andrew, Underwood growled, grunting from the pain as he eventually got up, grabbing onto his Mk-18, fumbling his grip before he realized that he also had a grenade launcher underneath the barrel. Did it at least felt good sleeping on hay bales? Andrew mocked, collapsing the bipods of his machine gun as he adjusted it on the ledge of the window. Ain't as good as making out with your sister, Underwood chuckled, lifting home up. Believe me, Woody, you don't want to fuck my sister. She has some loose bolts, she's kind of fucked in the head. Andrew smirked, pulling the charging handle of the machine gun to himself and then pushed it forward. The crazier the better, Andy, the crazier the better. Underwood patted his shoulder. So what are we dealing with anyway? A bunch of nasty dudes at the front entrance. Go to the storage room, Brooks is there as well. Only open fire when I tell you, understood? Eric gave a short explanation. Copy that, Underwood nodded, rushing to the storage room. As Eric peeked through the window where Andrew was set up, he would notice that those gangsters have occupied the buildings to the sides of the road. Each of them had crossbows loaded with flaming arrows. They were preparing to launch a volley for the looks of it. Eric would like to accommodate their effort in boxing them in, but it's nothing more than a target-rich environment. Everyone was in position, the JSDF Rangers in the first floor, his Marines at the second floor, and ghosts on rooftops. The large group in front of the entrance didn't budge just yet but instead remained in place with menace intent, the flaming arrows revealing the numbers of archers that occupied the buildings for a vantage point. The gangsters would not attack yet, they were certainly prepared to charge upon command, instead a raspy voice boomed from across one of the occupied buildings. "My name is Bessera, and it is your unfortunate fate that you haven't come to learn of this name sooner. I don't appreciate newcomers that settle on my turf," the man known as Bessera exclaimed, except that, like an idiot, he just exposed himself. The silhouette of a man could be seen next to an archer, as he gestured his hands while talking. Eagle 9 Echo. This is Assassin 1, target priority. Military-aged male, right row, second building, second floor by the window next to the archer, over. Eric whispered into his radio headset, directing the Ghosts team on the roof. The sniper team would momentarily take their time to scan the area based on his description before the spotter eventually spotted the target. "Yup, I have visual on target. 2 o'clock by the window, second building, second floor, the fat guy next by the archer, that is poking out his head like some baboon. Adjust 80 meters on target, fire on command," the spotter informed the Ghost sniper next to him as he was leading him to the target. The sniper peeked through the night vision scope of his Mk13 bolt action, the gun now trained on Bessera. "Bessera, this is Lieutenant Okada of the JSDF. We're highly advise you to reconsider your actions. If you will not comply within the next minute, then we will open fire. This your only warning," Okada firmly stated. "Fine, have it your way. Kill them boys. Burn these fuckers alive," Bessera shouted his command, which was immediately followed by a volley of flaming arrows that were launched into the sky and dropped with rapid speed. One of the arrows headed right through our window, but Andrew luckily dropped his head down in time as the arrow passed right above his head, hitting the wooden floor behind him. "Wait for it," whispered Mitchell. Then one of the gangsters rushed at the door with a giant mallet. "Knock knock," shouted the gangster. "Waste these fuckers," yelled Eric, and the Mk.48 machine gun opened fire, literally shredding the gangster. All MARSOG and JSDF Rangers have responded with the lead steel shower. The large group that stood idly near the entrance now charged at the front doors. The Rangers that were one floor beneath all opened fire, penetrating the wooden doors as they briefly fired blindly. Some four-armed guy with a giant hammer dropped dead and smashed the door out of its frames with the remaining momentum that he launched himself into the air with. His body limb as it twitched occasionally and blood seeped out of his numerous bullet wounds he had received to his chest, a huge pool of blood forming underneath him that even coated his own face. JSDF Rangers rapidly moved to organize a defensive formation around the doorway that was now widely exposed. The Rangers rushed past the lifeless body of the four-armed gangster, their boots pounding the blood-soaked floor, sending droplets splattering across the room and staining the leather with each step. Meanwhile, Ghost snipers on the roof had their eyes on Bessera, observing his shocked and perplexed face that was also in their crosshair. "Fire," the spotter said calmly. Prompting the sniper to take the shot, his finger instantly pulled the trigger. The bullet left the suppressed muzzle with a silent thud. Within a split second, the bullet found its way into Bessera's chest. The .300 Winchester Magnum teared through the skin and flesh, grazing the heart, upon which it ruptured and poured out blood while the bullet exited through the back. Bessera succumbed to a cardiac arrest in an instant, stumbling back before slamming and dropping dead against a wall. Assassin 1, this is Eagle 9 Echo, target has been neutralized, over, the spotter reported while the sniper pulled back the bolt and chambered another round. Copy that, Assassin 9 Echo, stand by for further targets, over, Eric replied through his radio. Copy that, acknowledged spotter. Assassin 1 to all Assassin Victors, focus fire on buildings on the left-hand side and right-hand side. Provide continuous suppressive fire and use grenadier launchers to flush them out, over, Eric ordered. Each element responded in acknowledgement. Underwood and Brooks were currently engaging a building that was to the opposite of ours, their windows on the same level. Underwood positioned himself and fired his grenade launcher through the window when the projectile catapulted out of the tube with a distinguishing thud. Soon many more Marines followed suit due to Eric's order. Each building was surprised by fire and each window was relentlessly targeted and obliterated by grenade launchers. Underwood's grenade landed inside. The crossbowmen were launched across the room, their bodies filled with shrapnel. Others only suffered a concussion as they struggled to get up. "Let's go," shouted Eric, "on me. Clear the street. Clear the street. Watch every corner, alleyway, window, and rooftop." He and his squad runned out the door, taking point to clear out the stragglers. "Contact," shouted Eric, and he and his team fired their guns at the alley, killing several gangsters with knives. Then some arrow whizzed past him. Eric turned and fired his M27 at the enemies at the roof. "Snipers," he shouted, while firing, second floor window, right side. "Fire a frag." One of the Marines raised and fired his M203 underbarrel grenade launcher. The grenade exploded, causing a scream of the man inside. "Clear," shouted the Marine. "On me, men," said Eric, "let's go." "Should've stayed home, motherfucker," Andrew shouted as 200 rounds of 7.62 mm full metal jacket rained over the road with the collective effort of JSDF Ranger machine gunners and riflemen. The road was soon piled up in bodies. Assassin Q to all assassin victors, cease fire and commence BDA in 5 mics, over. Eric contacted his teams, all of them responded with the usual acknowledgement as always. The quiet would settle in again. What was just a combat zone before, now turned into a wasteland of mutilated corpses. The moaning and screaming in the distance could be heard yet again as if nothing changed. The smoke from their muzzles curled upward, the moon radiating its glow upon us as Eric leaned by a window, the smell of rot, piss and blood lingering in the air. Sometimes he would see a guy pass by as he occasionally glanced at their hideout, and upon noticing the piles of bodies, he would freeze, slowly walking backward and stumble before taking off in panic. A lone figure ran desperately down one of the many alleyways that crisscrossed the district. His normally immaculate attire was now dirty with the filth and grime that existed the streets of Akusho, while his face showed that he was now a man filled with a sense of terror he was not familiar with. His gasps echoed throughout the cobblestone streets, as the man frantically tried to make his way to what he thought would be his salvation. He could still hear the screams of his men as they were quite literally ripped apart by an unseen force. His best soldiers and enforcers, many of them demi-humans, were killed when they tried to retake the playful elf. By Hardy, they didn't get close enough to even enter the building. He too would have probably been a part of that slaughter, but his own cowardice possibly saved his life. As the crime lord had in fact been overwatching his men from a nearby balcony. But upon seeing his men decimated before him, Becerra ran as fast as he could off said balcony, just moments before gunfire blanketed the location. No sooner had he made it to the street, he could see his men laying either dead or dying. Some of them pleaded for him to help them, but the crime boss just kicked them away from him before running away as fast as he could. The man that was once said to had as many bodyguards around him as the emperor himself, was now alone as he ran for his life. Just who or what had killed all his men? How were they able to defeat his private army, which is the largest in Akusho? Exclamation mark. Just who were they? There was no moon out that night, making the streets and alleyways all that much more darker and sinister. The streets were completely deserted, as most of the district's inhabitants were inside their homes. But the crime lord could hear voices coming up from behind him. Who did they belong to? Becerra did not know, nor did he want to find out. His main focus was to reach the safety of his mansion, one of the few well-kept homes in Ahusko. But as the crime lord came around the last corner, he was met with a sight that left him completely speechless. For now standing in front of the main entrance, was not only his wife, but their 3 sons as well. They were still dressed in their regal attire as the mother of his children cried and begged to be let back into the compound. What is the meaning of this? Becerra demanded, as he made his way towards his family. Merdia, what's going on? They threw us out, the red-haired woman cried, as she threw herself at her husband. They killed all the guards and threw us all out. What? Becerra exclaimed, as he could feel a sudden sinking feeling in his stomach. Who threw you out? Becerra, a new voice called out from the darkness. Followed by a chorus of angry yelling. Looking in the direction the voice came from, the crime lord was met with sight that filled him and his wife with absolute dread. For now advancing on their location, were hundreds of men and women who were armed with various homemade weapons and torches. They were all yelling angrily and had murderous looks on their faces. These people were in fact, the very same residents of Akusho that for a very long time, lived in fear of the Becerra family. They had all lost loved ones in some way or form to the Becerra crime family over the years, but never had the will to move against them. But with news of the massacre near the playful elf quickly spreading among the populace, now there was a chance of the people of Akusho to remove one of the biggest threats in the district. Becerra and his family tried to look for a way to escape, but to their horror both he and his wife realized that all the streets were blocked by the advancing mobs. Becerra's wife began to openly cry as she held on to her children in an attempt to protect them, while Becerra himself just froze in place and watched as the crowd came closer and closer. The Becerra family had made many enemies over the years, but were too powerful for anyone to dare challenge them. But now his private army was gone and there was no one there to protect him or his family. A glass bottle smashed on the wall behind him, the shards cutting the now doomed crime lord's face on the left side, as the citizens of Ahusho came closer and closer. But just as the crowd was about to reap their revenge on the family, a series of loud thunder-like sounds filled the cold night air and the crowd came to a stop. This was followed by the sound of gates of the mansion opening up, and when the crime lord looked to see who it was, he saw a group of men dressed in the strangest attire he had ever seen, with even stranger black staffs in their hands. A thunderous silence fell upon the crowd, as the men formed themselves around Becerra's wife and children. "Now hear this," the leader of the group said with a strange accent. "The Akusho district is now under a new authority, ours. From now on, nothing will happen in this district, unless we say so." He then looked at Becerra's wife and children. "They are now under our protection and will be allowed to leave Sedera," Scott Mitchell stated, as his men began to lead the woman and her children back into the estate. But what about me?" Becerra pleaded, as he literally threw himself at the feet of his would-be savior and begged, "Do you know who I am? I am very wealthy, I can make it worth your while." The American and Australian just looked at the man before him with an emotionless expression on his face. The SAS captain and Colonel Mitchell was briefed about Becerra and his dealings, and it made their blood boil. "What about you?" Scott replied in an emotionless voice, before retreating with the rest of his men back inside the small estate. "I don't give a damn. You're nothing more than a pile of rot that rotting this district. Try to pay those who'd your life helped ruin, you piece of shit." He then closed the doors, and all Becerra could do at this point was look on helplessly, as the angry mob advanced on him. The sun had yet rise over the imperial capital, as a lone individual rushed through the deserted streets of the Akusho district. In the distance, he could hear the echoes of an enraged populace taking out their frustration on another individual who for a time, controlled the infamous slums with an iron fist and a ruthless agenda. His vain cries for mercy had long since been silenced, as Akusho's residents continued to do unspeakable things to the now doomed crime lord. His many crimes against the people of the Forgotten District had finally caught up to him, and the residents were going to make sure that leader of the Becerra crime family pay for what he had done. This individual himself had also been a part of the mob that went after the crime boss. But rather than contribute to the crime lord's demise, he had stayed just long enough to quite literally rip off 2 fingers off of Becerra's right hand, place them safely in his pocket, before clawing his way out of the crowd and running off into the night. But there was more to his violent actions than what one would expect. There were those within the criminal underground who would be more than pleased to learn about the demise of the Becerra crime syndicate. Persons who did not hold the crime family in high regard, but were in no position to do anything about it. Of course, that just might change after tonight. After what felt like an eternity, the individual came upon a door which was connected to a rather run-down building. If anyone were to see the structure, they would have just written it off as just another one of the many dilapidated buildings found within the district. But to those in the know, it was a place that was best to be avoided. 3 loud knocks echoed through the alleyway before a space opened up on the door to reveal the eyes of a demi-human glaring down at the person standing outside. "What is it?" the half-man, half-tiger growled in annoyance, as he knew the person standing outside is a low-ranking member of the Paramount crime family. By Hardy, calling this person a member of the aforementioned crime family was a stretch at best, but these underlings had been utilized by the Paramount before and was well known to the other criminal organizations in the district. The young man, one of the many informants utilized by the Paramount, just reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 bloodied human fingers which wore 2 very familiar gold rings on each of them. Rings which carried the symbols of each of the major crime families in Akusho and for many years, were a symbol of the Becerra family's power over the other crime families. The tiger man's eyes went wide in shock as the informant held up the severed fingers. He could smell the blood and it gave off a scent that only came when a fresh kill was made. The door swung open and the informant was ushered inside by the now excited enforcer, slamming shut almost as quickly as it had opened. Once again leaving the alley in silence. The Akusho district was still abuzz with news of Becerra's demise, as his mutilated body had been discovered earlier that day near the entrance to the slum. Then again, it was not every day that the leader of one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in the district was found dead. Even more so, the Becerra's private army, made up mostly of mercenaries, had seemingly vanished overnight as well. Of course, this was because of the supposed battle that had taken place outside the playful elf. A battle which wiped out most of them. Their bodies littering the streets and soaking cobblestones in blood. Bodies that quickly vanished as the day progressed, but the blood stains remained as testament to the slaughter which had taken place hours before. What happened to the bodies? No one could say. The residents that lived near the infamous brothel weren't talking. Then again, no one was keen on avenging the fallen crime lord, as Becerra's family had done a very good job at making enemies of the other crime families in not only Akusho, but in the Sadaran underworld in general. The Becerra family was just too powerful. They had their hands in everything and anything, and it was even rumored that the family had connections to some high-ranking officials in the imperial government itself. But somehow, a third party had eliminated the greatest evil within the criminal underworld, and it was something that did not go unnoticed by the other ruling crime lords in the city. It was not long before a meeting was organized between not only the surviving Akusho crime bosses, but some of the more powerful crime syndicates in Sadara. It was not often such a meeting would take place, but when one was held, it was because of something very serious in nature. By the time the day has come, several individuals had arrived in an old tavern near the entrance leading into the Akusho district. In a private room located above the tavern itself, several individuals sat around a large, circular wooden table. A handful of oil lanterns illuminated the scene as a trio of cat girls placed plates of food and mugs filled with alcoholic drinks for those in attendance, before quickly ushering themselves out of the room and back downstairs to the tavern itself. The heavy wooden door closing shut behind they left, thus signaling the start of that evening's meeting. So the rumors were true, that son of a whore Basara finally bit off more than he could chew. Always knew he would get himself killed, Duno Val-Lidas of the Calrissian Syndicate announced. His voice dripping with glee as his words left his mouth, as the notorious smuggler looked on at the pair of severed fingers resting in the bowl in front of him. I think, these on top of his mutilated body should be more than enough proof that our associate is no longer with us. Calico Medusa, leader of the Medusa crime family, replied. He too reveling in the fact that Becerra himself was indeed dead. It was in fact one of his men which had retrieved the former crime lord's fingers during the chaos of his untimely demise. Fingers which still had Becerra's gold rings still on them, rings many crime bosses were forced to kiss as a sign loyalty to the powerful family. But were now proof of Becerra's. By the way, the individual who retrieved these for us has been rewarded handsomely for these fingers for us. As you should. The Hondo del Sol, leader of the Alpaya Syndicate, remarked. The relationship between the Alpaya and the Becerra was icy at best, seeing that the Becerra had stolen a lot of merchandise from the Alpaya over the years, though I would suspect that a much bigger reward would be given to the ones responsible for Basara's downfall. By the way, have you discovered the identity of the ones responsible? We have, which is why we asked for this meeting. Leonata Paramount family, replied, though his voice sounded more concerned than jubilant. We are all well aware that the Empire is currently at war with an enemy like no other. Despite what those in the upper tiers of the city have been telling the public, the war is not going well at all. Indeed. Gurnu Gonzori cartel added on. My contacts in the Imperial Army has told me there are many in the leadership who believe that it's only a matter of time before these so-called other worlders attack the capital. But, we believe that these beings from across the gate are already in the city and that they were the ones responsible for eliminating Basara's organization. There was a moment of awkward silence, as Gonzori's words sank in. But while the heads of Akusho's criminal organizations seemed calm about the situation, the other crime lords were not. Are you saying that Sadara's enemies are already in the city? Del Sol asked his hosts, his normally calm yet confident demeanor giving way to someone who was more worried than anything. The other criminal heads just nodded in confirmation. This is, Duno spoke up, are you sure that these Other worlders were responsible for the destruction of the Bessera family. Without hesitation, Gonzori snapped his fingers and within moments, one of his bodyguards stepped forward and revealed a small leather bag in right hand, which he then handed to his employer before fading back into the darkness. Gonzori then proceeded to open the bag and shake out its contents onto the table, to which several small, metallic objects fell onto the table and before the satyr and crime lords. My people discovered these pieces near the vicinity of the playful elf after Besseras were killed, Gonzori explained, as the other examined the bullet casing before them. I showed my contacts in the Imperial Army these things and they looked as if they saw Lord Hardy herself. Apparently, scouts were sent in after the Imperial Army withdrew from the province, recovered these similar pieces from around Alnus Hill in Italica. Have your contacts been able to determine just what these things are made out of? Del Sol asked the cartel leader, as he examined the shell casing. Gonzori just shook his head and replied, I am afraid not. They believe that copper may have been used to create these things, but not even the scholars at the Imperial Academy can agree as to what they are made of, let alone how they were made. But we are getting too much off subject. Bessera is dead, and his family has gone missing. Upon learning of Bessera's untimely demise, I had some of my men visit some of Bessera's businesses. Didn't take you long to move in on his territory, Dunno said with a grin. Not like he was still gonna need it when he reaches Hardy's realm. The Akusho crime lord replied. But back to the case, when they began to approach the playful elf, they noticed a number of robed figures on the surrounding rooftops watching them. My men didn't know these individuals were, but they got the sense that they were being watched. Another team that was sent to the Bessera's residence reported seeing the same robed figures guarding the mansion, but did not see any of Bessera's men or even his family. So not only have these other worlders eliminated Bessera and his organization, but have taken over his properties as well, Dunno mused. Not all of them. Calico replied casually. Some of my people have reported that several of Bessera's gambling dens were still operating. Though it seems his former enforcers have taken the initiative and gone into business for themselves. What about his warehouses? The leader of the Alpaya asked his host, referring to several warehouses that were known to be used by Bessera's organization to store many of their illegal items. Warehouses that were more akin to tiny fortresses, considering the amount of guards which were posted to them. But it was Leonata who spoke up and said, they seem to still have a number of Bessera's men still guarding them. But I will bet that will soon change once Bessera's former enforcers decide they want what is inside. So none of you are planning to take the warehouses for yourselves? The leader of the Calrissian syndicate asked the Akusho crime lords, somewhat surprised that his counterparts were seeming uninterested in acquiring their former rivals' assets. We have more pressing issues to worry about and it is the main reason we called for this meeting. Paramount stated, before he took another swig of his drink. The Empire is at war, but from the evidence we have found and from what our contacts in the Imperial military has told us, it is a war they cannot win. No one in the upper tiers in the government or military wants to openly admit it, but the war is lost and the Emperor and his court either just does not know it yet or are in complete denial. They tell the populace that the Empire will never bow down to these barbarians, yet the enemy is already in the city. Make no mistake, Sidera will fall. So what do we do? Just let the Empire fall around us. Don't act as if you are suddenly a patriot, Del Sol Paramount replied. You didn't seem to have a problem with selling those weapons to King Duran. Though you were the only one who was approached by the Lion's people. Gold is gold. The Alpaya leader shot back. What I mean is, what should be our next move as a whole? If this war is already lost, then what should be our plans for moving forward? We may be able to pay off our people in the government and nobility, but I doubt that these other worlders would be willing to cooperate with us. Who is to say they would not come after us when they occupy the city? We all know the rumors surrounding Bessera's supposed links to Prince Zorzel. Calico reminded his comrades. It is possible that the only reason they dealt with Bessera in the way they did, was to isolate the imperial family from there within the city. It's what I would do. For once, I'm glad Bessera had links to the imperial family and not me. Hondo replied, as he had always envied the links the late crime bosses had within the imperial court. But now reveled in the fact that it were those very same links which had ultimately made him a target. But I think we may have to deal with the fact that these other worlders may not be too keen on working with of us. My contacts within the Slavers Guild have told me that ever since the other worlders took over Alnus, the group has lost several raiding parties from in that region. Dunno stated, owing to the fact that his organization was the only one which had some ties with the Slaver Guild. It was the Calrissian Syndicate which had worked out a deal with the private slavery organization which prevented them from operating within the slums of Sidera. An agreement which Becerra ignored and used the guild to supply the many sex workers he had in his possession. It seemed that these other worlders have been causing the guild quite a lot stress as of late. There is even a rumor that their stronghold at Rheinram was recently captured by the other worlder army, but the guild's leadership is trying its best to prevent their clients from learning the truth. If they were to find out the other worlders were attacking Slaver encampments. No one wants to buy slaves and risk a visit from said other worlders, Paramount replied grimly. It was no secret that the Slaver Guild was indeed a powerful organization within Falmart. They had their own army and infrastructure to protect their vast slave network. So for them to be running scared and hiding information from their traditional clients about the losses they had sustained, was a very troubling development to say the very least. I know this is going to be a dumb question, tried to make contact with the other worlders, Dunno asked the assembled crime bosses, gaining curious expressions from all of them. Open a dialogue with them. Maybe even seek an alliance which could mutually benefit the all of us. Have you gone mad? Calico asked the Alpia leader. What makes you so sure that the other worlders would want to deal with us? Considering what they did to Becerra and his men, I find it highly unlikely that such a group would want to deal with our less than honorable organizations. That is where you are wrong, Medusa. Dunno replied, as he began to explain himself. The other worlders are at war with Sidera and I am very certain that they would pay handsomely for any and all information in regards to the imperial government. I know for a fact that many of you have close ties with some of the noble houses in the upper levels. Are you suggesting we turn our backs on the noble houses? Paramount asked, an panicked expression forming on his face. As he and the rest of Akusho's surviving crime lords knew just what said houses would do to them once they learned about their betrayal, they will retaliate with force against Akusho. No, they won't, Medusa said with a neutral tone, as he soon came to a revelation of his own. Not if we ally with the other worlders and give them what they want. We all know what happened to Becerra and his men when they confronted the other worlders, and we have all heard about the carnage that took place at Alnus Hill. It will only be a matter of time before the rumors of the other worlders' presence in Sidera reaches the court and they will be running scared. They would not send their people into our district if they know the other worlders are here. He's right. Gonzori replied, those political fat cats would be too busy covering their own asses to be worrying about the slums. Provided they find out we are helping the other worlders. Like it or not, the Empire is not going to win this war, so we must place systems to ensure the survival of our organizations. Besides, they did do us a huge favor by eliminating Becerra. Hondo stated, the least we can do is provide them with whatever information they need, as long as it does not affect our bottom line. There was a long silence as the assembled crime lords mulled over what they had discussed. It was true that helping the other worlders could and would bring considerable risk to both themselves and their respective organizations. As much as the nobility wanted to act as if Akusho did not exist, many of them did have links to the criminal underworld in some form. But while most would only use these links to acquire certain items that were seen as illegal and hard to find, certain alcohols, exotic fruits, etc., many others used the services of the city's criminal organizations for more morally questionable activities. Services that made Becerra both a powerful and feared figure within the Sidera crime world, as well as one of the more despised, as his organization dealt with things the other criminal groups would not even dare to partake in. True, none of the other crime lords were not exactly pillars or morality, but Becerra's actions and business dealing made them all sick, and anyone who had dealings with the crime boss were just as evil, who deserved every bad thing that happens to them. But with Becerra gone and the Empire in a state of denial, panic, the gathered crime bosses saw a golden opportunity. One that could not only cement their positions within Sidera itself, but actually ensure the survival of their respective organizations when the war finally ended. But as the amber glow of the lit torches flickered away in the private room, the only question left to answer was, just how were they going to do it? Ever since Becerra was found dead, criminal activity within the Akusho district had seemingly gone quiet. It was something which did not go unnoticed by the shadow organizers, as the ANF Special Forces teams now found themselves becoming the de facto police force within the infamous slum. Unlike some of their brothers in arms currently assigned to monitor the imperial leadership, those assigned to Shadow did have the authority to intervene if needed. Hence the reason crime seeming evaporated within days of Becerra's demise. The residents of Akusho were well aware that the infamous Otherworlders were now in control of the district, but did their very best to ignore their presence within the slum. After all the Otherworlders had removed Becerra, the least they could do was not draw attention the Empire's would-be enemy. Besides, it's not like they were interfering with their daily lives. On one of the rooftops that overlooked the brothel, a Japanese sniper scanned the streets below for anything that was out of the norm. A task easier said than done, seeing that Akusho was home to both human and demi-human alike. But whatever, another world. It was now midday, as the Japanese ranger peered through the scope of his American-built M24 sniper rifle. The streets surrounding the playful elf were alive with the sounds of the locals going about their day. But despite the chaos taking place below, the Japanese sniper was still able to see a hooded figure seemingly walk up to the entrance of the brothel and leave a small package at the main entrance, before they seemingly melted back into the sea of humanity and vanished. Now this was very odd indeed, as most of Akusho's residents had avoided the playful elf ever since Becerra's death. But this mysterious individual had left them something they obviously wanted to be found. Using his radio, the sniper called it in and within moments, someone discreetly collected the small package and brought it inside where the force commander and several others were waiting. Upon opening the package, the assembled Japanese-Australian force discovered that it contained a small fortune of gold coins and precious gems that seemingly glowed in the ambient light. But despite the treasure that laid before them, it was actually a small note which had been attached to the package which really caught the attention of the Special Forces teams. A note that would prove very vital to the success of Operation Shadow. The criminal organizations of Sedera's many districts are thanking you for dealing with the Becerra situation and as such, reward you for your actions. However, we understand that said actions were probably as a result of your people's ongoing war with the Sedaran imperial government and its ruling families. We, the leaders of the various criminal organizations of Sedera, will not interfere with your operations and will assist you wherever and whenever we can join request. We ask for nothing more than to maintain the peace within Akusho and ensure that no more blood is spilled. Akusho is yours. The heads of the three remaining crime families in Akusho were meeting to celebrate the very recent demise of the Becerra family the previous night and to finalize a few matters regarding the disposition of the Becerra family assets and continued relations with their new partners in the Allied Nations forces. Speaking on behalf of the ANF was the captain of the Australian SAS. Two Gurkha sergeants were providing the visible protection for a man who hardly looked like he needed any protection, save his own abilities, and the three surviving family heads understood all too well that other hands were watching, at the ready if anyone was stupid or foolish enough to threaten their new business partners. "All right, Captain Harrington," the head of the Gonzori family began. "We delivered on our word and you quite clearly delivered on yours. The Becerra family has been dissolved. And with that, we're ready to come to a full understanding with your people." "Good. We're hoping that our dealings can be mutually beneficial." "They already have been." Growler, head of the Medusa family, grinned a toothy grin befitting his feline heritage. Becerra was dangerous to everybody. If I could have found it in the remains, I'd cut his heart out and fed it to the cubs. We may have had to put up with him, but no one's exactly missing him either. The heads of the other families nodded in agreement. "There is the issue of distributing Becerra's territory and operations," the head of the Paramount family noted. "Your people took him out. None of us have any quarrel with you taking his territory." He pulled out a map but was stopped by a gesture from Captain Harrington, who pulled out his outmap and list. The other crime lords were dismayed to see it included assets that even they had been unaware of. "Aside from making food, clothing, and medicine available, we aren't interested in running Becerra's smuggling operations. If we need something we can't bring in ourselves, we'll contract out to one of you. The only weapons we'll be bringing in will be for our own use. So you can rest assured we won't be selling weapons to your competitors or anyone else. We do have to maintain our edge after all." The other men nodded in understanding. We'll make our medical services available to anyone in the district including your people. Wealth should be enjoyed in health, wouldn't you agree? Harrington remarked, then pointed to one particular location on the map of Akusho. We claim the Bessera's mansion and the playful elf is ours. The rest of Bessera's gambling houses and brothels are yours. He then pointed to an abandoned warehouse. This building is ours. After we finish fixing it up, we'll start bringing in Scotch whiskey, which I know you've had the opportunity to sample, also beer. Guinness, not that shitty Yank beer. He smirked. Also, if you are attacked, you can call on our assistance, should you require it. Other than that, you already know our terms. We pay well for good information. If we need to do anything unusual, we'll let you know in as timely a fashion as possible. We won't move on your territories. Respect ours and everyone prospers. Agreed. Agreed, Gonzoria answered with the others nodding. In that case, Harrington said, gesturing to an orderly who promptly carried over a bottle of Glenfiddich and presented it to Harrington, who showed the others the unbroken seal and then opened it. Here's to good business. A short time later, Harrington's lieutenant looked at him curiously. Yes, Jerry. We're actually going to be running a couple of brothels. Oh, I know how it all looks, Jerry, but even if the Imperial Army doesn't venture into this part of town, some of their men most assuredly do, and nothing loosens a man's tongue faster than alcohol and a lovely lady. I understand, sir, but I can only imagine what would happen if the Daily Fail got hold of this story, sir. With luck, I shall be a general and quite retired before that happens. Sergeant Harkness, Harrington beckoned to a burly, scarred man dressed in local attire. Yes, Captain. Good work on that little assignment. Are you sure you got them all? I've bugged every gambling hall in Akusho, Captain. And every house of ill repute as well. Unfortunately, the latter task had not been as easy or as enjoyable as one might think, since Harkness had to pretend to be drunk and get ejected before anything could develop beyond the requirements of the mission. The gambling houses, on the other hand. Well, there was a reason he'd been chosen for this assignment. Of course, if the captain thinks I may have missed a spot or two, then I will gladly exert every effort to correct this deficiency. No, Sergeant, I'm only surprised you didn't rob the poor fools blind. That would hardly be sporting, sir. Yes, well, now we can tell Major Nayutabaru and Lieutenant Cruz that they can bring in the rest of their people. Yes, sir. And Horace? Sir, Harkness asked. You can keep the 20% cut of your winnings. Sir, I'm deeply hurt you'd say such a thing, sir. Are you saying that you'd never take a fool's money? No, sir. But this was in the line of duty. It'd be downright unpatriotic to take more than 15. A new day was going over the Akusho district, but there was something certainly different in the air. It was as if the dark cloud that had hung over Akusho for many years had been lifted, and although the district still had its problems, the people began to feel an unfamiliar sense of hope. That things would finally get better. The many crime families and criminal organizations did not seem to have as much presence as they did once before after that night. It was as if they suddenly decided to put a cap on all their illicit activities for the foreseeable future, while a rumor began to spread that the head on the largest crime family in Akusho was found mutilated near the main entrance into the district. But while Akusho was not coming to terms with the sudden change in the daily norms, a single message was received by Fort Ginza that same day. Bletchley Park and Alice Springs are now operational. Target Kabukicho has been secured. Then, returned to them was another message. Proceed with the operation, Overwatch. Confirming. This is the end of part 14 of this What If. I hope you guys like it. Leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel to see more amazing contents.